Tonight's story is about a man whose name once lived on front pages and courthouse steps, a man in perfect suits under imperfect headlines. John Gotti, sometimes called the Dapper Don, later the Teflon Don. In this slow telling, we are not here for shock or celebration. We sand down the sharp edges. We leave the blood and shouting to history books and harsher shows. Here, he becomes part of the city's long, low hub, a quiet car on a wet Manhattan street, a club with no signing queens, a courtroom that will not blink, a legend that finally fits inside an ordinary cell. As you listen, you'll hear how power gathers in small rooms, how loyalty warms and burns, how patient tape machines outlast expensive ties, and how, even as headlines swell and fade, New York keeps doing what it does best: baking bread, sweeping sidewalks, getting children to school on time. This is a calm story for sleepy minds, nothing graphic, nothing loud. If we mention anyone made unalive, it will be like distant thunder beyond your window, acknowledged, not described. Settle in, let the rain on Queen's pavement and the soft murmur of diners and courtrooms carry you. When you're ready, close your eyes and follow the city at its quietest. Chapter 1. The Sidewalk Whisper. The city hums like a long bass note under wet neon. It is not silence and it is not noise. It is the steady in-between that keeps a person calm, when the hour is thin and the streets smell like rain and bakery steam. Tires hiss along an avenue, a bus exhales, a traffic light blinks like a patient heartbeat. Far off, a siren thinks about the night and decides to stay polite. Queens wears rain well. The drops dress the curb in a soft shine and turn puddles into small mirrors. I pass a diner where the window fogs from the inside. 3 regulars lean over coffee like monks with a new scripture. The cook flips a pancake with a neat wrist, and the motion lands with the certainty of a clock tick. A string of bulb lights gives the counter a small halo. Ozone Park at this hour is a listening room. You can hear the air gather under the L and then unfurl down the block. Trees lean like old friends who know when not to interrupt. A storefront on a quiet stretch is not quite a store. It is a clubhouse that learned the art of understatement. The wood is warm, the paint is tired in a dignified way, and the door says almost nothing. People call it Bergen Hunt and Fish in the same tone they say the weather will hold. Inside, the walls are the colour of cured tobacco, and the light keeps secrets. A television mutters to itself about a ball game from some earlier month. The antenna likes the past, and resists corrections. At the big table, elbows rest like anchors, and cups leave rings that look like maps of small islands. There is a rhythm that belongs to places like this. Cards whisper. Ice settles in its glass. A laugh flares and fades. Respect moves around the room on quiet shoes. Names live here. Jean and Pete, Angelo and Frank. The sound of each name lands with the weight of a tool in a drawer that has known it for years. The talk is not showy. It is the catalogue of favours, the ledger of who owes who a listen. And above the talk floats a thought, like steam over a grate. Power. Not the kind that yells, the kind that arranges. Power in New York is steam in winter. You do not hold it in your hand, you stand near it and feel the warmth. It blurs the edge of things and makes corners more forgiving. Folks speak of a man uptown who loves clean numbers and shirts white as a dentist's smile, Paul Castellano, a figure of height and routine, and a man in Queens whose step has learned the city like a native tongue, John Gotti. Tailors pay attention when he walks in. Cameras will later too. The papers will find nicknames because papers always do. First dapper like polished leather, then Teflon like nothing sticks. But that is later. Tonight it is still just a shift in weather. This is a calm story for sleepy minds. Nothing graphic and nothing loud. If a headline later calls a person unalive, we hear it like distant thunder that does not reach this window. The concern here is how loyalty rearranges, how a circle of chairs slides a little to the left, and no one mentions it, and yet everyone sits in a new place. The door opens, a ribbon of cigar scent slips to the sidewalk, and the room gathers itself. John Gotti comes in without rush. Confidence is not a volume, it is a temperature. He is dressed in a dark suit that does not need to announce itself. A tie, with the quiet shine of a well-kept street after rain. A nod to the room, one, then another. Not ceremony, not performance. A check of the lights, an inventory of faces the way a captain glances at instruments. People change posture a half-inch. It is friendly, like a belt after dessert, but the half-inch mean things. Cups move closer to saucers. A chair drags, then stops. Respect has 1,000 tiny gestures, and each word joins a chorus you can hear if you listen closely enough. When I say consolidate, I mean the soft machinery of a city that prefers predictability to thunderclaps. It means a dinner arranged so that two men who disagree learn to like the same dessert. It means a phone call answered on the second ring, and a message delivered with a smile that is also a boundary. It means that within the Gambino name, a compass needle settles toward Queens, and the clubhouse breathes a little deeper. The friction has old bones. Castellano is the accountant's soul in an empire of appetites, a man who likes long views from midtown windows and rules pronounced like vows. Another lane wants motion, wants the oxygen of the street, wants respect collected promptly and given in return. The line between the two is not drawn on a map. The line is a habit. You walk it until the leather of your shoes learns every crack. Across the river and up a bit, Manhattan burns in orange from steakhouse windows. One of them is famous for its heat and its loyalty to a good cut, Sparks. On East 56th, the pavement remembers every footstep to and from those revolving doors. Rain makes the sign do a mild dance on the wet ground. People pass thinking about dessert, or taxicabs, or the particular happiness of a dry umbrella. The city pretends to be the same as yesterday, while pressure moves like a tide beneath it. Papers later will use words with sharp corners. They will measure the night as decisive and tall. They will say a branch fell from a careful tree, and the trunk forgot how to stand. For us, the scene is the air getting still. It is timing wearing a good overcoat. It is a quiet door that decides to be a hinge for bigger doors. Back in Queens, the clubhouse door closes with a hush like a librarian saying thank you. Chairs scrape and then decide they have arrived. Someone tells a joke with only the middle part, and the punchline is a glance. The television gives up on sports and wonders about weather. The forecast is a low front of attention, followed by a warm streak of certainty. Attention is a currency you earn and spend at the same time. Tailors enjoy the business that attention brings. Photographers do too. A man who walks with easy shoulders learns when to allow the flash, and when to let the flash burn itself out on the sidewalk. Dapper becomes a word the tabloids toss like confetti, despite the hour. Later, when courtrooms act like umbrellas, and the rain of accusation rolls away, Teflon appears like a sales pitch that sticks by insisting nothing can stick. Tonight we are not at that counter. Tonight the coin is respect, and the exchange rate is favourable. The circle at the table leans in. Jean mentions a street where a favour is overdue. Pete mentions a number with a curled tail. Angelo watches the door the way a lighthouse watches a coastline, and says nothing, because saying nothing is sometimes the assignment. John listens with the patience of a dealer counting chips he already knows the value of. He does not interrupt often. When he does, the sentence has a landing gear and touches down softly. A nod sends a man to a payphone. A raised eyebrow cancels a plan that would have been noisy. Outside, the rain is almost a mist. Steam lifts from a grate in a ghost of a wave. A classic sedan hums by with the confidence of a long marriage. In the barber shop down the block, the broom has learned the shape of hair and moves on instinct. A school crossing guard hums along with a radio that refuses to die and yet plays the right station out of stubborn love. Queen's mornings have a flavour all their own: bread, bus breaks, coffee, and the faint metal tang of the L starting to wake. At St. John's Cemetery, names on stone rest without comment. Years from now, a headline will look back at a life that moved fast and dressed well, and ended in a place far away from this block. That is a later chapter. Tonight and the dawn that follows are about arrangement. Arrangement is the honest art in a city like this. You do not conquer a place that learned about empires before breakfast. You arrange it. You know which hallway light flickers and who to call to fix it without making a receipt. You arrange who sits where and why a certain corner stays empty, not for any reason you can print, but because empty corners keep rooms from arguing with themselves. John leaves the clubhouse near first light, the way a captain leaves a wheelhouse. No rush, no doubt. The men do not rise. Their eyes do. A nod is a handshake you can do across a room without touching. The car outside purrs like a cat that knows it is welcome on the furniture. He slides in. The door thuds a soft period at the end of a long sentence. He passes a deli taking first delivery, the owner stacking bread like bricks for a home you can eat. A baker wipes his hands and watches the car pass and thinks about butter. A kid on a bike rides through a shallow puddle and draws a shining line to no place in particular. The city is a thing you share without signing a contract. You give each other half steps and polite lies and space on the sidewalk like change for a bus fare. Back at the table, a plan to collect a debt becomes a plan to remind instead. A plan to speak loudly becomes a plan to wait a day. Winning is often patience in a nice suit. Respect grows not from volume, but from a man's ability to leave a room calmer than he found it. There is an old truth about families that run on rules and roots. When a new centre of gravity appears, there is a moment when everyone feels taller and shorter at the same time. Out in Brooklyn, over in Manhattan, down on the island where the press sleeps in packs and wakes hungry, people who count themselves invested in outcomes measure the change with their hands. Butchers do not use scales for wrapped packages. They weigh them in the palm to know if the price feels right. Bosses do something similar with the air. Castellano's preferences are still facts, order, quiet numbers. The confidence of a midtown lunch where the butter never runs out and the waiter knows how a coat should hang. But facts can lose their throne when the room changes its mind. The corridor between those worlds is East 56th Street, where the glow from sparks gives the pavement a memory that will never quite dry. Again, we are gentle here. The loud part belongs to headlines. In this story, it is enough to know that heat moved from one pair of hands to another. Night returns to Queens like a cat who knows which window opens first. The clubhouse learns to breathe at a new pace. The cards sound different, for reasons no can explain. In a back room, a suit jacket rests on a chair like a flag after a parade. The ash in the tray sketches a coastline that looks a little like Staten Island if you tilt your head. Someone counts to 10 on his fingers and starts again because habit is a lucky coin you rub in your pocket. The television finally finds the weather. The forecast mentions a front of attention from downtown, a spell of light in front of cameras, a stretch of days where paper boys shout the name that fits well in big type. Dapper first, Teflon later. The words come easy to the city, which has always been fluent in names that are not names. A reporter in Manhattan sits at a desk that smells like old lead letters, She drinks coffee that tastes like ambition and chews a pencil flat. She is not in this room, but the story will reach her anyway, carried by a man who knows a man, and by the way a face looks different when it has decided to stop asking and start telling. She will write a first paragraph that tries to balance gravity and gossip, and then she will change it because the city keeps breathing while she types. People who live near power learn a posture. They call it normal. They say it softly. They arrive a bit earlier and leave a bit later. They watch a door reflection in a spoon. They listen for certain footsteps on the stairs and pretend they were listening for the kettle. Respect grows in these small attics of behaviour. It is not fear. It is weather sense. You bring a coat not because it is raining, but because the sky is that colour that means soon. On Jamaica Avenue, a vendor sets out umbrellas, and then, in a small act of faith, sets them back inside because he has decided the rain will not keep its promise. A bus kneels for an old man, and the old man salutes the driver with 2 fingers and a grin that looks borrowed from a friend who cannot make it this morning. The car with the dark paint and tidy chrome takes a right, and then another right, and then is gone like a word swallowed at the end of a sentence. What is consolidation when you peel off the headlines? It is a dinner that lands. It is a joke told at the right time, to the right man, about the right memory. It is the shift from asking to arranging. It is knowing which phone to call, which door to knock, which silence to keep. It is the way within the Gambino map. Lines redraw themselves a hair's width at a time, until the picture is new and nobody remembers when it changed. There will be tapes later, a hum in the walls that thinks it is a secret and is not. There will be courtrooms that shine like school floors, and men in suits that whisper with each step. There will be a verdict that takes the air out of a room many states away from this street. Those are later rooms in this house. Tonight, we are in the foyer, listening to a coat being hung on a hook that used to belong to somebody else. Dawn finishes combing its hair. Queen's smells like toast and the hope of a small raise. The last coffee in the clubhouse cools to the temperature of fact. John Gotti stands, and the room stands with its eyes. He leaves as he arrived, steady and unhurried. Outside, the mist admires the cut of the morning and tries to copy it. On the corner, a newsstand lifts its shutters and yawns. Somewhere downtown, an editor decides which nickname goes up top and which waits for a second day. Somewhere uptown, a window that liked to see the city from above finds itself looking inward instead. And in this outer borough, a block that has watched everything and panicked about very little returns to what it knows. Dogs get their walks. Kids learn the day has a taste like chalk and promise. Brooms draw clean lines through yesterday. If you are listening to fall asleep, you may rest now. The dangerous parts are filed off, the edges made round and kind. We are not here for glory or horror. We are here to watch a city adjust its tie in a quiet mirror. A captain has taken the wheelhouse. The sea is the same sea, the course is a few degrees new. The crew finds its steps without being told. Chapter 1 ends where the coffee does. A last sip that is warm and bitter and somehow proud. Outside, the rain becomes a suggestion. A cab slides by like a thought no one speaks. A door clicks shut, a half-inch of sound, and the street becomes itself again. A long hush that knows more than it says. Chapter 2 The Club with No Sign. The club hides the way a cat hides, in plain sight and entirely sure of itself. A modest door, a narrow window with a curtain that stays the same colour no matter what the weather tries. On the street, the letters on nearby shops make promises about keys and tailoring and lottery luck. This door makes no promises at all, and somehow delivers more than all the others combined. Morning has finished its opening act, and settled into the steady light that flatters brick. A truck sighs at the curb and the driver checks a clipboard, and then his watch, and then the sky, as if the sky might sign for the delivery. A kid kicks a bottle cap along the gutter and invents a season where every team wins. A woman with a bakery box steps carefully, as if the sugar on top might be a snow that remembers how to slide. Inside, the air holds on to last night in a comfortable way, not stale, just well-lived. Wood remembers hands, leather remembers shoulders. The round table in the centre has rings from cups that trace an archipelago of old conversations. Someone has polished the lamps so the room glows like it believes in second chances. They call it a club with a shrug because names are often disguises. Bergen Hunt and Fish is the phrase people use when they need a phrase. The hunt is a hunt for consensus. The fish are favours that swim through the city and are caught with patience and a decent suit. You do not apply for membership. You behave like someone who belongs, and the door behaves accordingly. By late morning, the regulars drift in. Jean with the steady eyes, Pete who knows the weather 3 hours before anyone else, Angelo who can sit and look like a portrait while actually keeping track of 3 things at once, Frank whose laugh arrives in short friendly barks that make the ice in his glass nod. They arrive without fanfare, the way residents arrive at their own front steps. The television, a square window that prefers yesterday, tries a talk show and gives up. A radio near the kitchen offers a tune from a decade that refused to leave. The news today is not the news. The real story is the temperature of the room. After the quiet pivot of power, people look at the same walls and see a new map. The corners feel like they could hold more without breaking. Power, when it settles, behaves like a polite guest. It asks about your mother. It compliments the curtains. It nudges a picture frame straighter. John Gotti has the gift of making the nudge feel like your own idea. He arrives without hurry, tips 2 fingers to the man at the door, and lets the room breathe him in the way a church breathes in incense. The suit is dark, the tie understated, the shoes the kind that know how to be quiet and still be noticed. He takes a chair that is not marked but is his, not by force, by fit. The table adjusts. Conversations tuck themselves in and line up. This is not fear, this is choreography. Respect is a dance you do with your eyes, your shoulders, your timing. A hand lifts and a coffee appears. A glance lands and a plan changes lanes. Rangement is the craft of the club with no sign. Today the work is a list that looks simple until you try to carry it. A street that needs attention because a merchant forgot how bills should be paid. A cousin who wants a job when what he needs is an hour with a man who can teach him how to knock. A rumour that somebody uptown is asking the wrong questions with the right smile. None of this is dramatic. All of it matters. Jean spreads the list like a deck and deals tasks without moving his hands much. Pete adds a note about weather and traffic because even power has to get across town without missing a light. Angelo watches the door as a form of hospitality. A guest should never need to wonder if he is expected. Frank pours water and keeps the glass filled as if the room itself might get thirsty. John listens. Listening is the oddest strong act in a city that rewards talking. He listens like a craftsman tests a line for plum. He asks a question that is really a kindness. He declines an offer that would have created noise without creating benefit. He reminds a man that respect out is the only path to respect in. None of this is new, but under the new sky it feels like fresh paint. Around noon the door opens, and a man from downtown steps in with shoes that think they are in charge. The shoes are only partly wrong. He is a lawyer who likes the right kind of bad idea. He is here to be seen without looking like he wants to be seen. This is a skill and a hazard. The room receives him with the warmth and offers to a neighbour who keeps his dog from barking after dark. He says that the temperature in certain offices is rising. He says that curiosity is a common cold and that some people are not washing their hands. He says he can help where help is legal and can help a little where help is only almost legal. The room tolerates him as people tolerate a draft in winter when the heat works otherwise. John nods and sets the tone. He says less than the lawyer does and communicates more. He thanks him in a way that is also a boundary. The man collects his hat and his hopeful smile and leaves with the same shoes that tried to lead. The door closes with a sound like a secret deciding to be quiet. In the afternoon, the club conducts ordinary miracles. A brother-in-law with a temper is moved from a job that asks for patience to a job that asks for lifting. A bar that poured too much on the house learns to pour exactly enough for the house to stay a house. A delivery route is adjusted so that neighbours who do not get along still share the same street without making a headline. This is the housekeeping of influence. The vacuum hums. The corners shine. Coffee changes to seltzer, and then to something stronger in small doses. The conversation widens and tightens at once. The men speak of the past without getting stuck there. They speak of names that belong to legends, and names that will one day belong to headlines. In each mention there is a careful respect for what can be said and what must be implied. The club is a school where inference is the main subject. As the light bends toward evening, a visitor arrives who carries a different kind of weather. He is an old-timer with a face made of friendly dents. He remembers the days when the city was louder and smaller. He remembers a corner on the Lower East Side where a man could buy a hat and learn a rule in the same minute. He sits and tells a story that has no sharp edges and no wasted words. He says that power is like a coat that fits only when you earn the right to wear it. He says that a man can look like a king in the wrong coat and still freeze in the wind. He says he has seen men try to buy the coat, and the coat would not button. The room listens like a congregation. John smiles the smile of someone who knows that a story kept him warm once, and might again. They speak of Castellano in a way that is tidy and true, order, rules, a preference for numbers that add up the same way every time. The old-timer nods, not to praise and not to scold, simply to mark the chapter before the chapter. He lets the room sit with the fact that all power is rented, and that the rent is due in respect and results, and the absence of foolish noise. Dinner is a practice more than a meal. Plates arrive with the confidence of small ships entering a friendly harbour. Sauce breathes its happiness into the air. Bread breaks without argument. A joke about neckties lands and leaves the right afterglow. Nobody spills, nobody boasts. The quiet that follows a good bite is the club's second language. After dinner, plans that were vague in the morning have become outlined in pencil. A cousin gets a job that will make him tired in the right ways. The merchant who forgot how bills work remembers suddenly and promises to keep remembering. The rumour about the uptown smile grows smaller as a different rumour is arranged to replace it. The city's bloodstream circulates, and the club with no sign is of the valves that keeps the beat steady. As the evening pulls on, the room talks lightly of newspaper men. There is a reporter who writes like a tailor, with neat seams and quiet style. There is another who writes like a drummer, all noise and courage. The men predict which Juns will come knocking first, and where that knock will land. They decide to let the quiet writer find the good quotes that are not quotes, and to let the loud writer run out of adjectives. The plan is not spiteful, it is weather management. John steps into the hallway for a minute that means more than a minute. In that narrow space, the phone on the wall thinks about ringing and then does. He listens, and the heat in his eyes goes down 1 degree as the news arrives that a small problem is now a smaller one. He says good night, the way a conductor thanks a soloist, then returns to the room at the beat where the music needs him. Night settles onto Queens with the patience of a book being closed a page at a time. Outside, the neon on the avenue begins its soft rehearsal. Cars roll by like quiet thoughts. The barber across the street turns his chair so it faces the window and cleans it until it reflects a world that looks slightly better than the real one. Inside, someone lays out cards but no one plays. The deck serves as a calendar, a way to measure time with soft shuffling. Two men compare notes about a neighbourhood on the island where the bridges are the strong bones and the houses sit like well-behaved pets. Another man names 3 restaurants where a table can be a shield or a stage, depending on who arrives first. The room holds all of this without strain. The club with no sign is not an office and not a church. It is a port. Boats come in with different flags and leave with a similar course. The men here are not saints and not simple. They are a crew that understands 2 truths. 1. The city respects a steady hand. 2. The city tests a steady hand every day. A young face enters near closing. He is careful in a way that makes people generous. He has done a small job and done it well. He says little because little is called for. John gives him a task that is slightly larger than the one he expects. The room watches the transfer of weight with the agreeable silence of a good audience. The young man leaves taller by a whisper. The door hushes after him like a curtain. Later, a plate with the last olive sits near the centre like an exclamation that learned to be polite. Ash in an old tray draws a coastline. The men consider and then forget. Someone counts to 10 on his fingers and then, for old comfort, does it again. The television returns to weather, as if sports and politics were just a long commercial. Rain tomorrow, maybe. Sun tomorrow, maybe. The only certainty is that tomorrow will ask for arrangement again. They speak briefly of uptown, not of any act that would scare sleep away. Only of the way officers breathe, of how sandals become shoes when the season turns, of how a doorman's hello can tell you who visited that day and who visited that hour. Small signals. The city is a book written in shorthand, and you learn to read it, or you spend your life guessing. A phone rings once and stops. The sound hovers like a moth near a lamp. A man glances at John, and John shakes his head the width of a coin. Not this ring. The room returns to its hum. Power does not chase every sound. Power knows which sounds announce themselves and which sounds arrive with the envelope that matters. Close to closing, the old-timer tells one more memory. He remembers a winter when a man mistook attention for safety. The room nods as if it has known this man a dozen times with a dozen names. The old-timer says that style is only armor when handled with modesty. He says a bright tie can be a target or a flag to rally around, depending on how you stand under it. He raises his glass to the idea of standing correctly, and the room drinks to posture. John thanks him in the tone of a nephew who has learned something and intends to keep it. He says that the city has a long memory for loud mistakes and a short memory for quiet successes, which is why quiet successes must be repeated daily. The men agree without clapping. The consensus settles into the furniture like a pleasant weight. Closing time comes not with a shout, but with a soft choreography. Glasses migrate to the bar and then vanish. Chairs lean under tables just enough to communicate rest. Coats return to shoulders. Hats consider their angles and approve of themselves. The door is unlocked to let people out, and immediately feels locked again, even before the key twists. Outside, the avenue offers a small breeze that smells like late soup and early newsprint. A cab glides past with its light off, a promise kept for someone else. The barber waves with the towel he has been folding for 10 minutes. The bakery box lady from the morning passes again, this time with the calm of completion. Life in a city is errands and epics, and sometimes the errand is the epic. John stands on the stoop for a minute that stretches politely. He looks both ways, not for danger but for context. Queens answer with the soft machinery of a borough that prefers dignity to drama. He descends the steps, and the car opens its door like a sentence inviting a certain ending. He sits, and the street exhales. Back inside, Jean locks the register that does not hold much money and holds a great deal of confidence. Pete folds a paper he never read because the radio already told him what he needed. Angelo checks the window with a glance that says he could tell you the last 20 faces who looked in and what each face wanted from life. Frank stacks coasters like small shields and grins at his own neatness. When the lights go down, the room keeps a little glow the way good places do. The table waits for tomorrow's elbows. The lamps wait for tomorrow's reasons. The door waits for tomorrow's quiet parade of men who will carry a city on the flat of a hand and never admit it. The club with no sign has held the day steady. No lions tamed, no mountains moved. Yet streets will be calmer because of the conversations that learn to walk today. A merchant will sleep without counting errors. A cousin will stand in a doorway and look necessary. A rumour will fade, and, in its place, a more honest truth will find a chair. If you are drifting towards sleep, let the image settle. A small room, warm wood, the smell of sauce and aftershave, men who speak in gentle tones about serious things, and leave the rough parts outside for the headlines to mishandle. In here, problems were measured, trimmed, and carried to the curb with quiet hands. A city is better by wine degree when such rooms do their work. Chapter 3: The Quiet Car on East 56th. Manhattan evenings have a way of arranging themselves. Lights come on one window at a time, like careful decisions. Taxi lines gleam. Rain gathers in seams of pavement and turns each block into a slow parade of gold and silver streaks. East 56th carries itself with a certain posture, like a street that knows its name is said by people in pressed shirts and good shoes. At the corner where Sparks throws an orange glow across the wet asphalt, a quiet car idles. Not fully parked, not fully in motion, breathing. The motor hum is low and polite, the kind of sound that agrees with conversation. The driver keeps both hands on the wheel the way a violinist holds a bow, not tight, just certain. The sidewalk moves in gentle currents. Couples walk with the tempo of a promise to meet again. A waiter on break taps a cigarette on a matchbox and reconsiders. A doorman 2 doors down maps the night with short glances, counting cabs, counting umbrellas, counting familiar faces, as if the city were a deck he can shuffle with his eyes. Tonight the city is practicing understatement. If the air knows about power, it is not bragging. If the pavement knows about history, it is not telling. The quiet car idles and the restaurant glows, and somewhere many blocks away a small room in Queens listens to the same weather and nods as if the two places share a long hallway of understand. The driver has been here before. He thinks of the street like a patient. He knows the pulse of a Thursday, and the breath of a Saturday, and the special hush of a night when a plan prefers to walk instead of run. He is dressed like an answer. Hat set just so, coat that turns rain into a suggestion, shoes that believe in sidewalks. Inside Sparks. Knives and whispers and waiters move like a ballet, where the music is clink and murmur. Jackets, open and close like stage curtains. A table near the window hosts a pair of men who speak in the language of totals and tips, hands telling the story while the mouths smile. Another table is laughter with restraint. No one is loud. Even triumph here is edited. Across the street, a man in a camel coat pretends to read the paper and actually reads the room. He is a watcher by profession and a waiter by nature, patient as the ninth inning. He has a job to do, but the job is mostly to notice. Notice who pauses before the door. Notice who touches a pocket without thinking. Notice who looks at a reflection instead of a face. Far from here, back on the boulevard where the L hums, the clubhouse has agreed on a few truths. A change becomes real when the smallest gears accept it. A name elevates itself when the coffee arrives faster and the jokes land softer. The city, which often loves conflict like a child loves fireworks, is offered something different tonight. Not a boom, a shift. John Gotti is not in the quiet car and not in the restaurant. He is somewhere between, a figure with his own orbit and his own timing. He has delegated the car to a man who understands that a car is a sentence and the full stop matters. He has delegated the nearby air to men who understand how to stand without creating shadows that ask the wrong questions. The traffic light changes from go to wait and back again, and each colour paints the car a different mood. The driver watches the glow play across the hood and imagines the night as a slow tide. He counts a rhythm in his head that keeps his breathing even. In that rhythm there are no sirens, no crowds, no loud conclusions. There is only the work of being ready without seeming eager. Across the avenue, a police cruiser slides past like a teacher in a hallway. No hurry, just presence. The driver does not shift. The doorman nods to the cruiser as if to say the lesson plan is the same as ever. The city wants order and spectacle at once. On this block, order is winning by a comfortable margin. A man in a dark overcoat steps close to the restaurant door and lets the evening examine him. He straightens a cuff, smooths a sleeve, gives himself the gift of a second to find center. The camel coat watcher registers the movement without judgment. The driver, through the glass, sees the same gesture and stores it away. Small movements are signatures. They tell a story even to people who do not read. The door opens. Warm light breathes onto the sidewalk, the kind of warmth that tells you there is stake in the world and that butter is a real idea. Two men come out talking, not loudly, not carelessly. The first man sets the pace, the second falls into step. The doorman tips an invisible hat. The watcher lowers the paper as if the headline had just become less interesting. The driver lets his hand settle on the shift with a touch that says not yet and soon at the same time. Timing is everything, and also the only thing. Someone said that in a room with too many chairs once, and it remains useful. On East 56th, timing has the courtesy to take its hat off. A cab pauses at the corner as if to bow. Two women in wool coats share a joke that makes the night lean closer for half a second. The air changes, like a page being turned with care. None of what follows needs to be loud. A headline later will work hard at being tall. We will let it have its height without that height entering our room. Here the emphasis is on the quiet car, the steady driver, the door that opens at a well-chosen moment, and the way a city changes its breath without breaking its stride. The driver pulls forward the distance of a handshake. The men near the door pause for the sort of glance that can change a season. The watcher folds his paper with the crispness of habit, and decides he has seen enough for a memory that will pay its rent years from now. In Queens, a phone rings once and is lifted before the second ring can gather itself. A voice says it is done, without saying what it is. The listener nods into the silence that follows. Then the receiver returns to its cradle, and the room resumes the business of being measured and careful. Back on East 56th, the night softens all edges. The restaurant glows on, the doorman resumes his patrol of courtesies. The cab at the corner finds its passenger. The quiet car eases away with the grace of an answer that does not require follow-up. The driver sees his own face in a window for the briefest instant and looks almost startled by how calm it is. The street does not clap, does not need to. In a city that survives on noise, true events often prefer a whisper. People who will tell the story later are still inside finishing dessert. People who will write the story later are elsewhere drinking coffee that tastes like ambition. People who need sleep will get it, because the night has not raised its voice. Every shift of power leaves traces that are not footprints. A table that used to be reserved at a certain hour is suddenly available at another. A tailor who mailed a bill to an address begins to sew initials in a different combination. A corner in a clubhouse where men once avoided eye contact becomes the place where the newest jokes land first. John Gotti arrives in the general way that fresh paint arrives, making everything look like it was supposed to be this colour all along. He does not arrive on this block at this moment. He arrives in the pattern that began months ago with small courtesies and precise responses. He arrives each time a man in his circle chooses restraint over display. Each time a plan subtracts unnecessary steps. Each time respect is paid with interest. The papers will later name him in large letters and dress him in words that people enjoy saying. Dapper because suits fit, and visits to the barber are treated like appointments with the weather. Teflon because courtrooms lose their appetite while he is seated inside. These words are part of the city's theatre. The stage lights belong to them. But the quiet of East 56th tonight belongs to the work of arrangement. In the quiet car, the driver thinks about his father, a man who taught him the trick of seeing without staring, the trick of hearing details without collecting gossip. He remembers being told that a good wheelman is also a good listener, because streets have voices. They warn you, they invite you, they sometimes ask you to leave, and if you do not hear the request, you risk becoming impolite. He passes a block where the sidewalk is slightly higher and the people walk as if the concrete owes them gratitude. He passes a florist carrying buckets outside, and the water sloshes like impatient rain. He passes a traffic cop who has mastered the art of frowning with affection. The city nods back at him in 100 tiny ways. Back in Queens, the old-timer who visits certain afternoons sits alone at the round table and runs a finger along a coffee ring that looks like an island with a friendly harbour. He does not need to be told anything more than he has already been told. A good sailor can smell a change in wind from the shape of a curtain. He smiles and mutters something to the air about coats that fit. The club begins to fill as the hour thickens. Gene checks a short list twice, then a third time because he enjoys the neatness. Pete watches the sky on the television, ignoring the news because the clouds on the weather map tell him what he needs. Angelo sits in the chair angled toward the door and practices looking like a painting while measuring every arrival for quiet intent. Frank polishes glass until it looks like a captured circle of daylight. When John enters, he accepts the evening the way a conductor accepts a baton. He does not demand volume, he creates tempo. A few nods travel the room like clean cursive. The key question tonight is simple. Has the city accepted the adjustment? The early answers say yes. The city favours a steady hand. The city also enjoys a certain shine. He can offer both without bragging. He hears the short report from the man who took the call earlier. It is a report made of careful nouns and verbs. No adjectives. Adjectives are for later and for people who sleep with dictionaries under their pillows. John says good. He adds be kind, where kindness buys quiet. He adds be firm, where firm protects the peace. He adds carry yourself, so that luck thinks you're its idea. News trickles in the way soup reduces, slowly, growing more concentrated and honest as the steam rises. A merchant in Brooklyn paid and promised to stay current. A kid in Staten Island proved he can be trusted to deliver messages without adding his own flourish. An officer in a small precinct, who respects stability more than spectacle, chose to look at his watch instead of at a car that preferred not to be seen. No cheers. The room simply breathes easier by a fraction. Across the river, the doorman at Sparks finishes his shift. He will tell his wife nothing beyond the usual. A busy night, people with good coats, weather that sticks to your collar. He will sleep well because good routines are pillows. He will wake to a city that is 1 degree calmer and will not know exactly why. He does not need to know. He did his part by standing straight and opening a door 30 times with the same polite nod. Back to the quiet car making its slow path through Midtown. The driver idles at a light and looks up at windows stacked like chessboards. Somewhere behind one of those windows, a young reporter is bending a first paragraph into a shape that respects both truth and bedtime. She will leave out the clang and choose the hum. She will mention names that are public and leave unsaid the names that merely keep the gears oiled. The car turns south, and then east, and then south again, a gentle zig that becomes a zag, and finally a straight line home. The city follows like a cat, interested but not required to commit. When the driver reaches a block where the L sings a silver chord, he rests a second at the curb and thanks the motor under his breath for being faithful and quiet. Machines like compliments too. In the clubhouse, a small celebration is permitted and then folded away. 2 plates of pasta appear and disappear with the clean efficiency of a magic trick that never needed applause. Coffee is poured. A joke about neckties and weather lands and leaves the right gentle echo. The old-timer tells a shorter version of a story he told before, and it is still good, because stories worth keeping are coats worth wearing in every season. They speak of courts in the soft way you speak of churches in a city that has many rooms of polished wood and patience, rooms that listen to themselves. The men here do not discuss proof or daring. They speak of posture, of how a man should arrive unruffled and depart unhurried, of how a tie can be a line drawn in the air, neat and unbloody, of how silence is the most persuasive sentence when used with care. The night deepens and Queens gives up a little more traffic to sleep. Outside, a bus kneels for nobody and continues. Steam rises from a grate like a sigh that learned to dance. In the distance, a train tucks itself into the rails as if the tracks were blankets. The room listens to the city, and the city listens back. John stands, and the room rises by a half-inch without moving. He thanks the crew in a voice that would not wake a cat. He reminds each man of way small thing he does well. People grow taller when reminded of small truths. He says, "See you in the morning," like a promise, to keep the world in nan peace. Outside the door, the air smells like rain. Reconsidered, a taxi glides by with its light on, and then thinks better of it. The barber across the street has left his chair at a perfect angle to catch the first sun. The bakery, 3 shops down, is already waking the dough with kindness. Queens believes in breakfast the way empires believe in borders. A quiet car pulls up, not the one from East 56th, but a cousin with the same manner. The door opens with the courtesy of a sentence that ends at the right time. John slides in, and the night forgives whatever minor missteps the day made. The car moves off, not fast, not slow, just correct. Think now of East 56th as it is at this hour. The glow of the steakhouse dimmed to a memory on the pavement, the doorman gone home to sleep, the watcher in the camel coat at a diner with a bowl of soup, not reading the paper now because the paper has become tomorrow. The street keeps its secrets by the simple method of not telling them loudly. The lesson of the quiet car is simple. In a city that pays by the syllable for noise, the real work often travels by whisper. A door opens, a door closes. A driver keeps his hands steady. A plan prefers to walk. Headlines will arrive with feet on tables. We will let them. Our story breathes here, where a hum is enough, where power is steam and steam is warmth, and warmth is loyalty with good posture. By the time dawn thinks about combing its hair, East 56th is just a street again. The orange glow is off. The sidewalks are damp and sincere. The quiet car is somewhere else doing what it does best, which is to make motion look like calm. And in Queens, a room that filled and emptied with the logic of tides waits for its first cup and its first decision of the new day. Chapter 4. After the Long Dinner. Night in Manhattan ends the way a good song ends, with a last chord you feel in your ribs more than in your ears. The long dinner has dissolved into coats and farewells, into nods that mean more than toasts ever could. Somewhere a chair is still warm, and a waiter is still counting tips in his head. The city stretches, adjusts its tie, and looks toward the river as if the water might write the next paragraph. Back across the line where boroughs change hands like polite rivals, Queens turns the page with less ceremony. The streets receive the hour the way a barber shop receives a Monday, with workmen calm, with brooms that know what to do. The clubhouse with no sign keeps a small glow like a lighthouse that refuses to be dramatic. Inside, wood breathes, leather settles, and the lamps remember handprints in their soft shine. After the long dinner, the city is a little different, in ways that will not be obvious until lunch. The balance has shifted, a finger width towards certainty. The air above the table that matters most no longer trembles. It purrs. John Gotti walks in with the steady stride of a man who has taught the floor to meet his feet halfway. He carries no bouquet of new words. His gift is arrangement. Respect here is measured in chores completed, not in confetti. He touches the back of a chair, checks nothing in particular and everything at once, and lets the room take his temperature. The reading is good, a degree warmer, not fever, comfort. Men who plan for a living relax a fraction and then compose themselves, because rest is sweet only when earned and never for long. Breakfast arrives in the language of plates. Eggs that keep their shape, toast that remembers the heat, coffee dark enough to steady a hand. Frank arranges the cups with a precision that would flatter a jeweller. Jean has a small notebook, the colour of a winter field. Pete brings weather news without using the television, as if Sky were a dialect he studied in school. Angelo claims his place with the art of a statue that happens to be alive. The morning agenda is both shorter and heavier than most. After the long dinner, there are people to thank and people to reassure, and one or two people to forget with kindness. Promises made in passing are the kind that trip men later. Today they become written, at least in memory. The rule here is simple to say and hard to keep. Make fewer promises and keep all of them. John listens, which is to say he shapes the day with the gravity of his silence. Silence can be a warning. Today it is an invitation. He hears the list and edits it with a nod. This man gets a visit, not a call. That man gets a call, not a visit. A merchant with a habit of delay will be placed on a plan of promptness. A cousin with the wrong ambition will be given the right work before the wrong work finds him. They speak of restaurants that offer more privacy than their square footage suggests. They speak of a tailor who reads moods from the cut of a sleeve. They speak of a small social club in Brooklyn, where two men who dislike cut another need to sit at the same table soon and pretend to be cousins for the length of Van Espresso. The city is a web, and they are careful about which strand to pluck. The old-timer arrives late and early at once, as only old-timers can. His coat carries the weather in folded form. He says good morning like a toast to reasonable men. He takes his coffee black and his advice simple. He reminds the room that after a change, the most dangerous thing is to believe the change is finished. Rivers braid and unbraid themselves. The safe path is the them that looks boring from a distance. John smiles and agrees by not disagreeing. He asks about a certain street where deliveries have become unreliable. He asks about a certain man who smiles too much when he has nothing to say. He asks about a small precinct where an officer has quietly become a friend to peace and deserves evidence that the feeling is mutual. The questions carry the answers inside them, and the men hear both. At mid-morning a visitor comes with the confidence of a man who has practiced his entrance. He is a union fellow from a certain corner of labour where overtime is a philosophy. He offers cooperation with a handshake that squeezes more than necessary. He speaks in slogans that would look nice on a wall calendar. The room nods and lets the slogans pass like parade floats. When he is finished, John thanks him with a steadiness that unties knots without anyone feeling the pull. The man leaves lighter by the weight of his own performance. Jean drafts a schedule of small visits. This block then, that block, this office, then that office. The aim is not to be everywhere. The aim is to be exactly where calm grows quickest. Pete maps routes with his knowledge of how rain chooses certain corners to gather in. Angelo makes calls with sentences that contain no new information and yet leave people feeling informed. Frank refills cups and keeps an eye on the door for faces that need a second welcome. After the long dinner, the newspapers must be considered. Not the words exactly, but the direction of the words. The city speaks in headlines the way a neighbourhood speaks in nicknames. A page can praise without intention. A page can wound without trying. The strategy is unexciting and perfect. Offer the quiet reporter access to rooms with nothing to hide. Offer the loud reporter a smile and no extra oxygen. Let the facts be handsome on their own. The phone rings. Once. Twice. No urgency, just tempo. Angelo catches it by the third ring, the way a guitarist catches a note on the correct fret without looking. He listens and says yes, in 3 different tones that mean 3 different things. He hangs up and reports the summary. A shipment found its way home. A debt remembered the date. A rumour lost weight and will not make it through lunch. The room thanks the morning without saying grace. Noon inches across the floor in the shape of a rectangle. The light is a prophet for men who need to measure their patience. A kid from the neighbourhood rolls in on tasks, proud of doing them and not hiding it. He is given a sandwich and then a slightly larger task. Growth here is not a ladder. It is an accordion, expanding with the music. John steps into the small back office that is barely an office, and mostly a quiet corner. The wall phone has learned the weight of important hands. He called exactly 2 numbers. The first call is short and sweet, and ends with both sides pretending to be Thod, who insisted on hanging up first. The second call is slower. It is a thank you to a man who prefers to be thanked in private. John chooses words the way a tailor chooses thread colour. The stitch will not show, but it will hold. A man from uptown arrives with an attitude laundered for the occasion. He is an accountant by training and a diplomat by necessity. He offers clarity on matters that are not strictly his to clarify and receives, in return, a calm that money cannot buy. He leaves with a new respect for rooms that do not need signs to be understood. The city is learning to adjust its weight to the new centre without scuffing the floor. Lunch at the clubhouse is not a social event. It is fuel and punctuation. 2 plates of pasta behave like commas, a salad like a semicolon, bread like a period that comes at just the right time. A joke about the correct tie width makes a circle of shoulders relax. Jokes here are safety valves, opened just enough to keep the machinery humming. After lunch, the errands begin to bear fruit. A merchant calls to say thank you and means it. A cousin texts through a courier and says he is good for the task and good for the next just after that. A roomer returns, smaller now, and pulls off its mask to reveal no more than a bored man repeating himself. The room allows itself the luxury of approval without the vanity of celebration. In the early afternoon, John takes a drive. Not a parade, not a tour. A simple loop to feel the city with the soles of his shoes. The car hums like happiness that does not need to speak. Windows pass that have seen everything and still pretend to be surprised. He checks the pulse by watching how doors open and close, how store owners greet dogs, how kids on bikes claim the right to the middle of the block for the length of a shout. He stops at a corner where an elderly woman waits for a bus that is late by habit. He holds the door of the deli the length of her smile. He buys nothing. He leaves the door open an extra second so the smell of oranges steps onto the sidewalk. This is not strategy. It is fluency. A city knows when you are speaking its language. Back at the club, the old-timer tells a story about a different long dinner from a different decade. He describes a night where laughter was too loud and the next morning was a choir of headaches. He says that men who chase applause forget the job is balance. He says a table can be a throne or a trap depending on whether you share it. He sips coffee like a judge who has decided to acquit the afternoon. The conversation turns to courts in the abstract. Note the coming ones, not yet. The idea of courts, rooms where wood shines and voices find their best manners. The men speak of posture like it matters more than law, which, in rooms like that, it often does. Stand straight. Let words be few and smooth. Let silence do a third of the work. When the time comes, the tie should tell the truth that the mouth avoids. Mid-afternoon brings a visit from a tailor carrying a garment bag that holds a promise. He has the air of a priest who built his own chapel. He speaks in the arithmetic of shoulders and in the geometry of lapels. He pins a sleeve, steps back, and nods to himself. John thanks him with a simple phrase that includes a tip inside the courtesy. The tailor bows to the room by approving of its light. He leaves with a smile that would mend a bad day. News arrives that a certain writer has published something generous without being obvious about it, a profile that is more mirror than painting. The room agrees that this is ideal. Applause is for stages. For men like these, a mirror that flatters and still tells the truth is better. The loud writer, by contrast, has chosen adjectives that sound like brass instruments. The plan remains the plan. Smile, offer nothing extra, and let the brass tire itself with its own echo. As the hour leans toward evening, two men who have long nursed a small feud meet in the back room by arrangement. The room is sized for dignity. They sit with hands on the table, like diplomats who left their swords with the coat check. The talk is slow and specific. Neither man is asked to like the other. Each is asked to respect the delivery schedule, because the alternative is chaos, and both men dislike chaos more than they dislike each other. A handshake that does not quite become concludes the session. That is good enough for a Wednesday. Outside, the neighborhood performs its daily theater of ordinary grace. A barber sweeps a perfect half circle, and then another, like a dance performed for no audience and all audience. A delivery kid whistles a tune from a summer that refuses to retire. A streetlight samples the idea of being on and decides it is too soon. Inside, Jean closes a ledger with the satisfaction of a man who prefers neat endings. Pete declares a shift in wind that will bring a clear night with a chance of moon. Angelo walks the narrow perimeter of the room with a gaze that polishes corners. Frank builds a small city of clean glasses and knocks none of them over. The machinery of calm is everywhere if you know what to look for. John makes a few final calls. He speaks briefly to a voice that belongs to a precinct where logic and law remain on speaking terms. He speaks to a man on the island whose loading dock has become a place where patience goes to practice. He speaks to a tailor again to say thank you once more, because thank you twice is an investment with reliable interest. The old-timer rises with the timing of a curtain call. He lays a hand on John's shoulder, a gesture that contains both advice and blessing. He says steady wins, loud loses, and polite lasts. He says remember that a coat is a coat and not a crown. He says call me if you forget. John promises to remember, and means it. Evening settles on Queens, with blue that thinks it is velvet. The first stars try to compete with the city and lose gracefully. A car door closes outside with a sound that says, "See you tomorrow." The club with no sign reduces its brightness to a hush, and continues to glow the way good places glow when they have nothing to prove. After the long dinner, the task was to keep the new shape of the city from wobbling. The result is not victory. The result is balance. A merchant sleeps without rehearsing excuses. A cousin discovers he is tired in the useful way. Two men who preferred their feud to their business discover that cooperation pays better and feels like less work. A precinct breathes because bread is fresh and headlines are not necessary. If you are falling asleep, rest on this image: the round table with rings like honest history, the low lamp with a patient hum, voices that choose their volume to match the room's best self, a chair pulled back, then tucked in, a door that whispers good night and means it. The city is better by a degree you cannot measure with a thermometer. The change will reveal itself tomorrow in the smoothness of a handshake, and in the way a bus kneels for exactly the right person at exactly the right corner. John steps out into evening with a promise in his pocket, and no need to unfold it. The car greets him like a faithful sentence. He rides into the blue, into a city that respects a steady hand and is learning to prefer quiet victories to noisy stunts. He passes windows where dinners finish and dishes clink like coins in a jar marked grace. He passes shadows that are only shadows. He passes a barber who finally sits and appreciates his own neat floor. Somewhere, a reporter writes a paragraph that will not survive the editor, but will live forever in her notebook as a reminder that calm can be news if you write it gently enough. Somewhere else, a tailor chalks a line and imagines a suite of rooms where men practice being better than yesterday by the width of a stitch. Somewhere, a kid on a bike rides home wine-handed because he believes the night wants to show off for him, and he is correct. The car turns left, and then right, and then finds the broad, easy road that carries it toward a horizon made of bridges. The lights along the rail mark the path like beads on a rosary for insomniacs. The city keeps breathing, the crew keeps its vows. After the long dinner, the work continues as work always does, with small answers to big questions and big patience for small repairs. Chapter 5: The Press and the Suits. Morning papers arrive like weather. A front page passes from hand to hand, then becomes a tablecloth for coffee rings and crumbs. Headlines clear their throats and try to sing. Some sing on key, some prefer volume to pitch. In New York, the press is a neighborhood all its own, with alleys and stoops and unspoken rules about who waves first. The clubhouse listens to the city through ink and antenna. The television murmurs, the radio hums, and the papers rustle like small storms smoothing themselves out. The men at the round table are not afraid of attention. They are wary of it the way sailors are wary of a sky that looks too clean. John Gotti arrives in a suit that looks like the weather turned patient, not trying, just right. Tailors in this town are cartographers of the human posture. They draw maps on wool and silk that tell the truth about shoulders and hope. A good suit is a sentence that ends where it should. The knot of a tie is a promise you keep before you speak. They call him dapper, and the word sits on him the way light sits on polished wood. It pleases the cameras, it makes copy easy. But the room understands that cloth is not the story. Cloth is the frame. The story is arrangement. Still, frames matter to people who look fast and decide faster, so the tailor becomes a quiet partner in the plan. Across the river, editors practice the old craft of deciding what is important before lunch. A young reporter with neat notes and a neat conscience writes a paragraph that tries to be fair. She prefers verbs that walk instead of sprint. She knows that a city becomes what you write about it often enough. She hopes to write a New York that can sleep. Another reporter enjoys the music of adjectives. He likes thunder in a clear sky and will declare it if he must. The clubhouse has names for both of them, none unkind. One is the mirror that flatters without lying. The other is the drum that calls a crowd. The plan is simple. Offer the mirror a clean reflection. Let the drum tire itself playing the same song. The morning list carries media matters near the top. Jean reads it out like a man tallying fishing hooks. Pete adds a forecast for how long a story might last if nobody feeds it. Angelo studies the door and the phone, 'cause calls and faces are weather too. Frank moves among cups and saucers like a stagehand, who sets a scene the audience will trust without noticing the hands that set it. John listens and edits with small measures. No new quotes for the loud drum. Offer a quiet look to the mirror at a time of our choosing. Let cameras see the suit and the tie and the posture of calm. Let them not see heat or haste. If asked about storms, talk about umbrellas. If asked about thunder, talk about distance. A tailor visits before lunch. He brings a garment bag that contains a kind of composure. He speaks softly about shoulders and lines and the angle at which light respects a lapel. He pins and pauses and smooths. John thanks him in a way that adds gratitude to the weave. The men in the room approve without clapping. The suit will not win a case, but it will refuse to lose when. Phones begin their day like sparrows, quick and nearly cheerful. A television station requests a sidewalk moment that is almost an interview and not quite. A tabloid wants a photograph by the curb near a bakery, because pastry makes everyone seem friendly. The answer to both is later. Later is a useful word. Later is when noise forgets itself. When the press is hungry, a city becomes a buffet of guesses. The clubhouse prefers a menu. The way to set the menu is to offer something plain and honest at a time of your choosing. A few pictures outside a courthouse when the calendar demands it. A few words that say less than they seem to say. A coat that closes easily. A collar that rests. A smile that belongs to the neighborhood and not to the lens. The old-timer arrives with his museum of phrases. He orders coffee as if it were a favor he has every right to ask. He tells the room that attention is a wind. If you set your sails wrong, you capsize. If you set them right, you glide and look like you meant to. He says a flashy tie is a flag. A modest tie is a compass. People reach their destinations with compasses. They talk names because names are gravity. The press enjoys names that are easy to spell and fun to say. Dapper, Teflon, Bob. These are nicknames, and nicknames can become maps if repeated. The room accepts the first with a small smile and declines to argue with the second. The aim is not to fight the music. The aim is to choose the tempo. A limousine is arranged for later in the day, not a parade float, a moving room that tells the pavement we are arriving but not performing. The driver knows the rhythms of Midtown and can slide between pockets of curiosity without bruising them. He will not rush a light for effect. He will not idle for admiration. Before the ride, John goes to the back office to call a man who knows a courthouse from the inside out. The conversation is short, courteous, exact. A time is set for a walk up those marble steps when the city can see him be what he is determined to be. Calm, present, not persuaded by noise. The walk will be a sentence with no commas. The press has corridors nobody maps. In Nen, a photographer with decent shoes and tired eyes decides to shoot from waist height. He believes pictures are kinder when you meet people where they carry their breath. In another, a columnist with a taste for mischief chooses to write about Manhattan rain instead of men in suits, because sometimes a metaphor pays the rent better than a name. Outside, Queens arranges itself for the noon hour. A barber gives a baby his first trim, and the mother smiles with the relief of ceremony completed. A deli cuts bread, and the knife sings a thin silver note. The L rumbles with the tone of a train clearing its throat. This is the hum the room protects. This is the reason for the plan. The car arrives like the sound of agreement. Doors open with the dignity of a courtroom oath. The suit sits well because it was asked to sit well by hands that understand thread. The tie lies straight because lies have no place in cloth. Angelo steps out first and studies the sidewalk. Jean looks at the sky as if to bless its colour. Pete nods at the driver like a conductor signalling the downbeat. Midtown accepts the procession without pretending to be surprised. The courthouse steps wait with the patience of marble. A few cameras wait too, their red lights like tiny hearts. The mirror reporter with the neat notes is present. The drum reporter is late on purpose and early in spirit. The lenses mark the quiet of the moment and search for drama. They will not find it here. John steps from the car and the sidewalk adjusts, as if a table has been set for a measured lunch. He walks without hurry. He looks not at the cameras, but at the courthouse, as if it were a library where noise pays a fee to enter. A microphone approaches the edge of his sleeve, reconsiders, and hangs back. A question floats in the air. It is a question that invites a knee to jerk. The suit declines, the man inside the suit declines. The answer is 6 words about respect for process and the common wish for quiet nights in a city that works hard and sleeps less. The words are plain and nearly bland. Bland is a medicine that heals headlines. The Mirror reporter writes the 6 words down and decides to use 5 of them. She adds a description of the tie and the shoes, not as decoration, but as code for a certain discipline. The drum reporter arrives and asks for thunder. He receives the same 6 words and tries to make them rhyme with trouble. They do not. Inside, the hall smells like old varnish and patience. Court officers stand like uncles at a family party, alert but not eager. A clerk shuffles papers with the precision of a card sharp. A long bench hosts a few citizens who have the air of people who meant to be somewhere else today and do not mind being here. Matters proceed according to the choreography of law. Nothing dramatic, names said, dates chosen, hands folded, voices kept low. John stands upright and lets the room do its work. The suit behaves like a friend who knows when to stop talking. The press takes its pictures and pretends to see more than it is seeing. Afterward, on the steps, the 6 words are offered again, once for the mirror and once for the drum. A hint of humour is allowed, the light kind that says this is not a circus tent. The cameras blink like patient owls. The driver brings the car to the curb with the nose pointed home. The sidewalk exhales. Back in Queens, the afternoon has all the ingredients of a small feast. Good reports arrive in portions that satisfy. The merchant who once forgot how to pay remembers again. The cousin with the new job is tired in the way that makes a man's sleep and wake useful. A precinct where tension once broadcast itself now plays a quieter station. The old-timer returns and hangs his hat on the back of a chair with ceremony so small you might miss it. He says the press is a river. If you stand in the middle, it will push you where it wants. If you stand at the edge and wave kindly, it will think you are part of the scenery and move along. He raises his cup to scenery. The room drinks to scenery. A messenger drops by with fresh clippings. The loud column has spent itself of thunder that never quite arrived. The quiet profile notices the careful fit of a sleeve and reads it as discipline rather than vanity. The room approves the reading. Vanity is a sparkler. Discipline is a candle. Handles do not frighten children. Late afternoon brings the tailor back for a small adjustment. He measures a breath and pins a half-inch that might never matter and will still matter. He tells a story about a client who wanted to look like power and learned that looking like patience is stronger. He smiles and leaves a scrap of chalk on the table by mistake. Frank pockets the chalk like a souvenir from a good sermon. The phones quiet themselves, grateful for the rest. The radio switches to music that sounds like a sidewalk after rain. Cards whisper without becoming a game. Angelo reads the door for posture. Jean reads the ledger for poetry. Pete reads the sky for news the television could not pronounce if it tried. They talk about the future without making predictions. Courts will call again because courts are calendars with uniforms. The press will hunger again because hunger is what it knows. The plan is not a plan for triumph. The plan is a plan for steadiness. Arrive on time. Dress like you do not owe anyone a performance. Say less than you know more than you say. Evening edges into the room like a well-trained understudy. The lamps add their low honey. The suits on the chairs look like off-duty soldiers who are still eager to serve. A photograph from years ago rests in a frame with a face turned slightly away, as if the past were looking at the door to see if the present would walk in. John thanks the crew with a nod for each man. He names one thing done well today and one thing to watch tomorrow. Praise is measured because measured praise lasts. He pockets a clipping from the Mirror Reporter and leaves the drum to beat by itself in a stack on the bar. Outside, the neighborhood has perfected its nightly lullaby. A bus breathes, a baker laughs, a dog negotiates with a hydrant and wins. The barber brings his sign in, and if it glows, it now glows for him alone. The air smells like dinner becoming memory. Back on the island of tall buildings, photographers develop film and stare at screens and decide whether light told the truth today. Some will see composure, some will see defiance, because defiance pays better in certain corners. The city will accept both versions and keep walking. In a small apartment not far from the press district, the young reporter folds her notes and places them under a cup to flatten the corners. She writes a paragraph that will not shout and will outlast the shouters. She describes shoes that show care, a tie that respects the neck, and a sentence that refused to become a speech. She does not mention fear because none was there. She mentions patience because she felt it like a bass note. In the clubhouse, the old-timer rises for the second farewell that always becomes the real. He says the trick with attention is to accept the useful parts and decline the rest without making a posture of the decline. He says the trick with suits is to remember that the best suit is the one you forget you are wearing. He says sleep well and means it. John steps to the door. The car waits with the calm of a good idea. The driver opens and nods. The city outside is the same and also different by a fraction. Attention has been fed without inviting appetite to own the room. Cloth has been used as frame, not as costume. Quiet has been chosen and rewarded. As they pull away, Queen's gives that small approving sound that only people who live here can hear. It is the cheer of a block that avoided a headline. It is the applause of a streetlight that did not have to blink for blue lights. It is the yes of a mother who gets to read a bedtime story in peace. The press will return. The suits will be pressed again. The plan will be tested daily. That is the agreement a city makes with itself. If you keep your pace, and keep your posture, and keep your words small and honest, the river learns to flow around you without swallowing the boat. Night leans in. The car carries the crew back through the familiar turns. The clubhouse lamp clicks into its lower voice, the heart it uses for promises. The table waits for tomorrow's rings. The chalk scrap waits in Frank's pocket like lucky bone. The tie waits on its hook with the poise of a soft oath. Chapter 6. The Teflon nickname sticks. Morning carries the smell of ink and hot metal. Presses have done their night work, and now the city chews on the result. On stoops and in diners, pages open like small umbrellas against uncertainty. A name rides the top fold with a new companion word that pretends to be a joke and turns into a label. The Teflon nickname arrives with a smile you can hear and a shrug you can feel. Nicknames are shortcuts. They jump the line ahead of nuance and pay for their coffee with charm. Dapper was harmless, a compliment dressed as a headline. Teflon is something else. Teflon says that nothing sticks, that courtrooms behave like pans in a good kitchen, that heat is applied but eggs still slide off and leave no mark. The city repeats the word because it is fun to say and because it does not require homework. In the clubhouse with no sign, the room listens without flinching. The men have heard worse and better. John Gotti arrives as steady as a metronome. The suit is brushed, the knot centered, the shoes honest. He lets the word pass across the table the way a man lets weather pass across his afternoon. He is not alarmed by words. He respects what words can do and cannot do. Jean spreads the morning clippings like a dealer who knows the house rules. Pete, whose forecast rarely needs correction, guesses how long the nickname will float before becoming furniture. Angelo keeps the door and the phone and the room's pulse in balance. Frank pours coffee that insists on being the right temperature. The old-timer has not arrived yet, which means his entrance will land like a footnote that earns a laugh. Across the river, a courthouse breathes out. The latest hearing ended without fireworks. Outside, a journalist stares at a camera and tries to explain the absence of drama in a city that loves it. The phrase Teflon travels from one mouth to another, gathering ease as it goes. Somewhere in a newsroom, a headline writer leans back, proud of the vowel sounds and the way the word clicks against Don like cufflinks. Back in Queens, regular citizens try the word out in barber shops and bodegas. A barber says it once, then twice, then gives up on it because it smells like work to keep saying it. A deli owner shrugs, wipes the counter and returns to the numbers that pay the rent. A bus driver nods at nothing in particular and decides that a name with a fresh coat of paint is still a name. The old-timer arrives with the rust of a coat that has learned to keep weather in its pocket. He hears the word and gives it the smile he keeps for lively inventions. He says, nicknames are coats that strangers put on you. Sometimes the coat fits, and sometimes it itches. The trick is to wear your own truth beneath it so you do not catch cold when the fashion changes. The room translates that into a plan without needing to be told. They agree to treat the label as a passenger, not a driver. No speeches against it, no applause for it. Let it ride. If a reporter asks, answer with the same 6 words that tamed a different morning. Respect process, wish the city quiet nights, offer no fresh varnish, meet the camera with posture, not performance. A delivery boy brings a stack of fresh suits in their sleeping bags. The tailor follows, a priest of thread with chalk on his fingers like blessings. He fits a sleeve, trims a line of silence, pins a whisper. He talks about how a shoulder should sit when a man intends to let noise slide away. John thanks him and sends him off with the courtesy that makes a craftsman want to do his best again tomorrow. Phones stir. The quiet reporter requests a small window of time next week for a profile that would take place while walking. A walk avoids the theatrics of a chair and a microphone. The loud writer calls, leaves no message, calls again. The plan holds. The walk will happen. The loud call will return to its echo. In the afternoon, John takes a drive through neighborhoods that consider him family in the old civic sense, which is to say they enjoy when he brings gravity and resent when anyone brings sirens. He rides past a laundromat with a steady hum, past a bakery that has learned to let sugar smell like a promise, past a church with doors open to air things out. He tips his head to each block, as if to ask what it needs before it knows to speak. He stops at a curb where a boy practices free throws at a rim attached to a fire escape. The boy misses and retrieves and misses and retrieves, until the ball learns the new truth his hands are teaching. John watches without advice. He believes in practice that looks like persistence. He believes in wins that are small and private. He leaves without applause. The boy learns that this is how certain men say good job. Later, back at the table, the old-timer tells a story about another nickname from an older decade. A label that promised thunder and delivered drizzle. He says the public loves the music of an easy word. He says the men who last tend to lower the volume without turning off the song. He taps the paper where the Teflon word appears and declares it an adjective, looking for a shelf. The room places it on that shelf and gets on with the work. Court calendars are sheets of music. They tell you when to enter, when to pause, when to stand and exhale as if you had expected this note all along. The next appearance is set. No one knots a tie twice for it. The plan is what it has always been. Show up. Stand straight. Speak small and true. Leave without souvenir. Meanwhile, somewhere in a federal office with careful blinds, professionals who prefer nouns to adjectives discuss the trouble with pans that do not hold sauce. They review files with patience and write more careful notes. We will meet them in a later chapter when tapes begin to hum. For now, they are simply another part of the city's long conversation with itself. A messenger brings a tabloid with a cover that looks like a movie poster. The room lifts an eyebrow in unison. The picture shows a man smiling, the way a man smiles when he trusts his barber and his tailor and his stride. The copy repeats the nickname as if to guarantee delivery. Frank uses the paper to level a wobbly table leg, and the room chuckles because function is the best critique. Afternoon slides toward evening like a card under a door. People who spent the day pretending not to watch begin to relax into the knowledge that nothing loud will happen before bedtime. A police cruiser drifts by with the good posture of a ship at the right speed. The L sings a silver chord and continues. The block keeps its pace. Inside, the work turns domestic. A cousin with ambition is given a task with edges that will teach him patience. A merchant with a memory problem is assigned reminders that will keep his ledger awake. A rumour is detuned by the simple act of telling the truth in a pleasant voice. This is unglamorous labour. This is also how cities avoid headaches. On the courthouse steps the next day, cameras gather like pigeons. Not dangerous, only persistent. John arrives at the same tempo, wearing the same grammar of cloth. The question reach, polite but eager. The answers remain grains of rice, each enough to be seen, none enough to become a meal for chaos. The 6 words are offered with slight variation so that no one can claim there is music to be extracted. The Mirror reporter writes that a man walked as if the marble steps were part of his daily route. She notes the tie colour in a way that suggests discipline. She quotes less than others would have and tells more by telling less. The Drum reporter writes a paragraph that shakes itself like a dog, then another, and when thunder will not come, he talks about clouds that might form if someone somewhere would please misbehave. The clouds decline. The nickname continues to travel. It enters a pizzeria, a union hall, a cab, a beauty salon. Some mouths enjoy it, some mouths tire of it. In a schoolyard it becomes a joke that no one completely understands. In a church it becomes a prayer for calm wearing different clothes. On a stoop it becomes a shrug that says people like to name things so they can carry them more easily. One evening, a small circle of men meets at a place downtown where the coffee is strong and the ceiling has learned to listen. We will save the listening ceiling for our next chapter. For now, the talk is about what a nickname can do to the temperature of a room. It can raise heat or cancel it. The conclusion is to let the word walk by without holding its hand. The old-timer gives a final note. He says, Teflon is a kitchen word. Kitchens are where families find order after a day of disorder. If the word must follow us, let it remind people of breakfast, not of fireworks. The men laugh because they understand that a city is a house if you treat it like less. In the days that follow, calm practices its scales. Courtrooms host their rituals and release their participants with more dignity than spectacle. Streets see more errands than arguments. The press, having enjoyed its new syllables, looks around for different weather. The nickname moves from the top of the page to the line below the fold, then to a paragraph near the middle, and finally to the comfortable shelf where the city stores labels that once glowed. Through it all, John keeps to the choreography that suits him. He appears when appearing is required, and disappears when absence is the better gift. He thanks people, twice, especially those who will never ask for thanks. He walks into rooms at the exact moment when people feel like being their best selves, which is the only kind of magic men like him are allowed. A tailor finishes a jacket that looks like it knows secrets and would never tell. He passes the garment to Frank, as if passing a candle in a procession. Frank hangs it where cloth can remember the shape of shoulders. Angelo checks the window glass for reflections that do not belong. Jean straightens a stack of clippings and decides which ones will matter in a week. Pete predicts a stretch of fair weather if people let it be fair. A quiet thought settles over the table. The nickname that says nothing sticks may stick after all. The irony is neat. Words that describe slipperiness become glue. John hears the thought and lets it go. He is not in the business of arguing with irony. He is in the business of days that run smoothly enough to keep children asleep through the night. He takes a drive at dusk. The city offers its usual therapy. A barber dusts a shoulder with a brush that looks like a good idea. A florist shakes water from stems and makes the sidewalk smile. A doorman stands with the patience of a lighthouse, making arrivals feel like decisions instead of accidents. The skyline tries on the colour blue and decides to keep it. At a red light, a cab pulls alongside. The driver glances over, recognizes a face he has seen in papers, and then looks back at the light. He is tired in the honest way and cares most about green. The moment is perfect. Fame has been measured and found smaller than the need to get home. The car glides on. The city nods. Back at the clubhouse, a package waits. Inside is a clean copy of a magazine profile written by the Mirror reporter. The title is mild, the text is patient. It describes posture and tempo and the absence of boasts. It notes the way a tie can be neutral ground and the way a silence can take the temperature down without anyone feeling scolded. The room approves by letting the article sit on the table and earn rings. Phones ring less this week. That is not a measurement of victory, only a sign that the plan is working. Problems arrive in sizes that fit inside hands. Favours are asked with respect and answered with clarity. The old-timer naps in his chair for exactly the length of one cigarette that never gets lit. Frank lines up glasses in a row that would satisfy an engineer. Angelo watches the door like a poem. Late one evening, a small television segment airs with the nickname baked into the voiceover. The footage shows a man in a good coat walking as if his spine were a ruler. The voice says Teflon with a hint of admiration and a hint of complaint. The men at the table decide not to change the channel and also not to comment. Tension starves when fed this diet. On a Sunday, John visits St. John's Cemetery and stands for a while without words. The names on stone do their gentle work of telling time the long way. He nods at history without arguing with it. He leaves the ground to its quiet and drives past blocks where windows open to air sleep out of rooms. He waves to a crossing guard, who waves back as if they share a joke that involves only good posture. When the press grows bored, it often becomes fair by accident. That begins to happen. A columnist who had barked discovers the pleasure of writing about neighbourhood heroes. A photographer who had hunted angles rediscovers the grace of a straight line. The nickname remains, but it loses its claws and keeps its rhythm. The city decides that rhythm is enough. The chapter of Teflon is not an ending, it is a weather pattern. It reminds everyone that stories can be cooked without scorching if the pan is good and the hand is careful. It reminds the crew that posture beats volume. It reminds the city that sleep is a civic virtue, and that calm is not the absence of news, but the presence of balance. If you are listening to fall asleep, keep this picture. A table with rings that mark victories of arrangement. A lamp that hums like a bass player who never misses. A suit on a hook that looks like a promise kept. A nickname that learned to behave. A city that chooses to glide for a while instead of sprint. John closes the door behind him at the end of the night, and the latch clicks with the confidence of a period. Outside, the street breathes the same breath it had yesterday and the day before, only a little smoother. The car waits. The driver nods. The route home is a litany of small mercies. A green light that should have been red. A taxi that pauses correctly. A pedestrian who waves thank you, even though he had the right of way. The Teflon nickname sticks, yes. It will ride headlines and be repeated in card games and on stoops. It will be loved by some and laughed at by others. Inside these rooms, it becomes the least interesting part of a day built from patience and timing. Tomorrow will bring fresh chores and the same oath. Be steady. Be humane. Let the city sleep. Chapter 7. The tapes begin to hum. Morning in the federal building arrives like a librarian. Soft shoes, keys that never jingle, lights that come on with consideration. A room with no windows wakes and becomes a listening post. Coffee steams, pencils sharpen. A reel sits ready, small and patient, the colour of a quiet river stone. Someone checks a clock and nods to Noah. The city does not notice when history chooses small rooms. New York prefers parades and headlines, but most changes begin the way a whisper begins. A technician touches a switch with care, like a person petting a nervous cat. The tape takes the hint and begins its slow turn. The hum is not music, it is routine. Across the river and a few neighbourhoods south, A social club opens its eyes. Little Italy stretches, breathes espresso, and sets out its chairs. Mulberry Street has looked the same for so long that even the new paint apologizes. The storefront that is not quite a store dusts itself with pride. Upstairs, in an apartment that likes to be ordinary, Air remembers last night's talk. Agents speak in nouns and verbs. They prefer steady to dramatic. They prefer measured to bold. They prefer warrants that fit like tailored sleeves. The team has a plan drawn with straight lines: room, device, logbook, chain of hands. The point is not cleverness, the point is honesty. If you love proofs, you learn to love patience too. By late morning a van idles where vans often idle without being noticed. Inside, headsets wait like seashells. A woman with neat handwriting writes the date the long way and the time in words to keep her mind careful. A man from Brooklyn pretends the hum is a lullaby and then stops pretending. The tape does not care about biography. It cares about clarity. Back in Queens, the clubhouse with no sign runs its household. The round table carries fresh rings from coffee and conversation. John Gotti arrives like a conductor, arriving one beat before the orchestra needs him. The suit is right, the eyes are steady. The room adjusts as if a picture frame has been straightened. A day of arrangement begins its measured walk. There is word in the air that attention has reorganized. Not loud word, weather word. A barber heard that the downtown boys now prefer walking near Mulberry to walking near the river. A deli owner says he saw men measuring a sidewalk with their eyes. None of it is news yet. All of it feels like tomorrow. John listens. Listening has carried him further than anyone's shout. He does not trade posture for paranoia. He does not turn rooms into stages for suspicion. He says keep the tone. He says lower the volume, not the respect. He says if the city wants to listen, give it the sound of honest weather. The old-timer arrives with a coat full of seasons. He greets the room like a man tipping his hat to a church. He says the walls in this town have always had ears. Some ears are borrowed from angels. Some ears are rented from judges. He says, do not whisper secrets. You would not tell a priest. He says, speak in sentences that can survive print. On Mulberry, the club's door becomes a frame through which daylight performs its usual tricks. Inside, voices rise and fall, laughter visits and leaves, chairs scrape, an espresso machine lets off steam like a temper kept under control. Above, in the apartment that enjoys being ordinary, small instruments do their patient work. The tapes collect more weather than thunder. A joke about a necktie competes with the hiss of milk. A story about a neighbour's dog interrupts a list of errands. A cough erases half a sentence. The agents learn to love context. They note who arrives. They note who leaves. They note where silence becomes a bridge instead of a ditch. The hum continues into afternoon. The van breathes like a tired animal that knows it will be fed. The woman with neat handwriting warms her fingers on a paper cup and writes again. The man from Brooklyn changes reels with the care of a watchmaker. The technician hears a bit of nothing that might be something and marks the time with a dot. John takes a drive to feel the borough like a sailor, testing wind with a cheek. He passes a church with open doors and the smell of wax that never hurries. He passes a park where a chess game begins with the resigned joy of a habit that has outlived grudges. He passes a storefront where a tailor hangs a jacket and thinks of shoulders as promises. He stops by a curb where an old woman waits for a bus that is slow on purpose. He holds the deli door for her and lets the smell of oranges step out for a moment. He speaks with a merchant in a tone that means we are neighbours first and clients second. He speaks with a young man in a tone that means growth is gentle and also required. The day returns him to the table. Jean has a short list that somehow holds the map of the week. Pete reports a low-pressure whisper that might bring honest rain. Angelo has looked at every face that might matter and all the ones that do not, and can say who needs a call and who needs a visit. Frank polishes a glass that never seems to finish shining. They mention downtown only as needed. They are not children and do not need ghost stories. They discuss rooms, not rumours. They discuss schedules, not shadows. They discuss which conversations belong to sidewalks, which belong to cars, which belong to kitchens where sauce teaches patience. The rule remains the rule. Say less and do more. In the van, an agent removes his headset and rubs his temples like a man smoothing a wrinkled page. He grew up near the bridge and knows these voices in the same way he knows the smell of summer rain. He is not here to hate or adore. He is here to understand. He puts the headset back on and allows the hum to become the river that carries him to the next line. The tapes catch a certain rhythm in the way names are said. Some names land like handshakes, some names land like paperweights, some names are avoided, which is a kind of confession when the room is bored enough to speak plainly about everything else. The agents learn patience, and then patience teaches them more patience. On Mulberry, late afternoon turns the window into a mirror. Men see themselves and adjust in small ways. A tie is made honest. A hat approves its own angle. In the upstairs apartment, dust shifts in sunbeams like tiny planets orbiting the routine. The technician smiles at nothing. The machine keeps its vow. Queen slides toward evening with the relief of a long exhale. The barber closes his shop and leaves the chair at exactly the angle that makes morning easy. The baker sets dough for dawn. A bus kneels for a veteran with the grace of a promise kept. The clubhouse door opens and receives the day's last assignments. The old-timer tells a story that has no names and needs none. A tale about a room that forgot who it was for one loud week and paid for it with a year of trouble. He says that tapes are not magic. Tapes are rulers. They measure, that is all. If you live within good lines, the measurement flatters you. If you lean, the ruler has no choice but to tell the truth. Night instructs the agents to keep going. Night instructs the room on Mulberry to keep being itself. Night instructs the clubhouse to breathe in, breathe out, and lock the door with the click of a prayer. Somewhere in a courthouse, a clerk files forms that look like paperwork and are actually bridges. The next day, the hum resumes. Days are beads on a string. The string is patience. The hum records weather, posture, pauses, laughter, the ring of a spoon on china, a chair sighing, a joke that lands twice because the teller enjoys the echo. Every now and then a sentence arrives with weight. It does not need to be loud to be heavy. Agents practice the art of slow conclusions. A written line from a week ago learns to dance with a line from today. A face seen in a reflection decides to show itself again and becomes less of a stranger. A pattern that wished to be fog turns into a path with footprints. None of this makes the news. All of it is news. John does not change his stroll. He changes nothing obvious because nothing obvious needs changing. He reminds the room that calm is a choice, and also a skill. He reminds the crew that loyalty is loudest when it sounds like courtesy. He reminds the young ones that the city is a chorus, and the soloists burn out. A visitor arrives from downtown, not a lawman, a neighbor of a neighbor with a story about a cousin who is nervous about voices that sometimes sound like questions with badges. The room listens, and the answer is the same as before. Be polite. Be brief. Be certain about nothing except your own posture. The visitor leaves with shoulders that decided to relax. In the van, a new tape takes the place of the old. The woman with neat handwriting draws a line and writes the word noon, because writing the word keeps her steady. The man from Brooklyn smiles at a passage where someone describes weather with unexpected poetry. He thinks about his father, who sold fruit on a corner and measured men by whether they returned the crate. He thinks about balance and keeps listening. A small part of the city begins to hear a rumour that the upstairs apartment near Mulberry is not just an apartment. Shops near the corner shrug and get back to work. A regular at a cafe decides to talk about baseball instead. A priest considers a sermon on honesty and then decides to preach about patience, which is a cousin. The tapes collect more than words, they collect sighs. They collect the weight of a pause between two names. They collect the sound of a hand on a tabletop when an idea arrives and finds its chair. They collect the difference between a laugh that hides and a laugh that releases. These are small things. They are also the city, translated into sound. One afternoon the machine catches a line that feels like a brass key. The agents mark the time. They do not cheer, they do not raise voices. They do what good carpenters do when the beam finally seats correctly. They nod and move the plan 1 inch forward. The hum does not change. The hum cares nothing for drama. Back in Queens, the old-timer senses a draft nobody else feels yet. He asks for a sweater, though the room is not cold. He says that in this town you keep your posture even when alone. He says that even in a kitchen you speak like a guest in someone else's house. He says this will pass if the room remembers itself. John thanks him and adds a reminder that tomorrow is built from today. He asks Angelo to adjust his pattern of visits so that courtesy lands in different combinations. He asks Jean to arrange a breakfast that looks accidental. He asks Pete to keep reading the sky because the sky has been honest so far. He thanks Frank for a glass that shines like a good example. Evenings continue with the ritual of the city. The tailor pins a sleeve and tells a memory about a client who asked for a pocket to hide a worry, and how no pocket has ever been that deep. The barber across the street sweeps a curve that looks like faith. A child rides a bike with one hand and trusts gravity more than gravity deserves. Downtown, late, a supervisor reviews transcripts that read like dialogues with missing lines. He does not demand theatre. He demands enough stone to build with. He circles a paragraph and sets it beside another and sees a wall begin to suggest itself. He leaves the office holding nothing but a sandwich and a sense that patience has been paid. A week becomes 2 by the length of a reel. 2 becomes more. The hum performs its patient duty. The city changes no faster than it wishes. In the clubhouse, the men speak about the future in the voice they use for grocery lists. Good mornings, respect, posture, small wins, fewer promises, kept anyway. A private moment arrives. John stands alone in the quiet of early day. He looks at the chair where he sits most and imagines it empty. He looks at the door and imagines it opening to a man who is not a neighbour. He considers the weight of names and the cost of posture. He carries both with the calm of a porter who knows the train schedule by heart. He goes for a walk without entourage. The city greets him as it greets anyone who walks with respect. A shopkeeper nods. A kid on a skateboard veers and apologizes. A woman with a terrier smiles because the dog approves of his shoes. He walks as if the sidewalks had asked him to test their strength. Upstairs above Mulberry, the machine hears a joke, and then an old song hummed off key. It hears the scrape of a chair. It hears nothing of use for long minutes that become pleasant as a window. Then it hears a line that will matter later. Then it hears someone open a window, and the breeze makes the tape flirt with static. The technician sighs and writes a note in the margin about air. The agents pack at midnight the way bird keepers handle feathers. each reel in its case, each case in its bag, each bag signed out and signed in. The van leaves a space, and the space accepts the silence, as if it had been waiting to rest. The street cleans itself with rain that forgot to make a scene. Queen sleeps, the clubhouse light takes on its lowest hum. The city does not fall silent, it never has. It breathes, it purrs, it hums. Somewhere a reporter types a paragraph that will not run, and feels better for typing it anyway. Somewhere a tailor dreams of a seam, holding through a storm. Somewhere a priest wakes and writes patience on a card. Morning again, the hum again, the work again, a rhythm that respects breakfast and the slow courage of men who arrange rather than explode. The nickname that once asked for attention now sits on its shelf and watches the room behave. The tapes gather, the agents gather, the sentences gather, the plan gathers. In time, a certain day will come when the hum produces a chord. We will visit that day later. Tonight we stay with the low notes. Tonight we keep to the porch where the air is kind and the news is measured. Tonight we remember that even the longest road is a string of small steps. The van idles, the club breathes, the upstairs apartment continues to pretend it is ordinary and succeeds. If you are drifting to sleep, rest on this. Headphones resting on a table like shells from a quiet beach. A reel turning toward morning. A cup cooling beside a logbook with elegant handwriting. A room in Queens where men speak in humane tones about serious things and end the day with chores completed. A city that chooses to change by inches so its children can sleep through the night. Chapter 8. The Courtroom That Would Not Blink. Morning collects itself on Centre Street with the seriousness of ink drying. Marble steps wait like a held breath. The courthouse is a building that believes in straight lines, high ceilings, tall columns, windows that let in more sky than gossip. It has seen every kind of story try to bend its walls. The walls have never bent. Outside, the press arrives in layers. Camera tripods, cables, microphones, notepads, shoes that were not built for standing at Stand Anyway. The drum reporters and the mirror reporters stand side by side, each convinced the day belongs to their style. A line of onlookers forms with the patience of a bus queue and the curiosity of a matinee crowd. The nickname is in the air before he is. Teflon, they say under their breath, as if testing whether the word still has teeth. Some add dapper, as if elegance were an alibi. The sound is lighter than the stone under their feet, and that is the important part. Stone does not care for nicknames. Stone cares for records. The car arrives without hurry. The door opens with its usual punctuation. John Gotti steps out dressed like a man reporting to an appointment with his own reflection. Suit sharp, tie correct, hair a neat argument for discipline. He walks as he has always walked, shoulders level, eyes steady, a nod for the familiar faces at the barricades, not as invitation, but as acknowledgement. Questions rise like birds startled but not truly threatened. They ask about pressure, about charges, about the word Teflon now that certain tapes have joined the choir. They invite drama. He declines politely. A handful of words about faith in process, a wish for fairness, a nod to the city that works hard. This is not theatre, even if the lights try to say it is. It is posture. Inside, the courthouse smells like old paper and polished wood. Security wands hum, shoes tap, coats rustle. The elevator doors open and close with the timing of a slow metronome. On the trial floor, benches wait for stories and for the people who will tell them. The seal on the wall is the only decoration that dares speak. The courtroom chosen for this chapter is bright without being kind, fluorescent patients, long wooden pews, a rail that marks where watching ends and acting begins. The judge's bench looks carved from a single serious thought. The clerk's desk is a nest of folders and quiet resolve. A row of seats waits for the jury, like a blank staff waits for notes. Jurors file in, each carrying a private life that did not ask for this. A teacher, a mechanic, a woman who runs a bakery, a man who sells small insurance policies with large sincerity. They take their places, instructed to listen as if listening were a civic oath. They look once, then away, then back again, learning quickly how to see and not stare. Prosecutors arrive with briefcases full of nouns. No nicknames, no drums, just counts and clauses and recordings that hum when played. Their suits are dark by design and unremarkable by principle. Agents take seats behind them, faces quiet, ties ordinary. They are here as gardeners of evidence, not as stars. The defense team arrives with folders that reflect hours, days, seasons of preparation. They adjust ties, straighten cuffs, speak in low syllables. They know every groove in this wood, every sigh in this ventilation, every angle of every camera that might try to turn a gesture into a headline. Their job is both shield and translation. John sits at the defense table as if the chair belonged in his orbit. He leans to listen when needed. He keeps his gaze calm, not challenging, not shrinking. The nickname may be in the hallway, but in here he is a name on a caption, a citizen addressed as Mr. The judge enters. Everyone rises, as they always do. Ritual is the building's favourite language. Opening statements are like weather reports read from different windows. The prosecution speaks of structure, pattern, agreements that never learned how to be lawful. They talk of tapes and ledgers, of voices that arrived on reels, of codes that do not stay coded forever. They remain polite. No sparks, just flint. The defense responds with a portrait of a man adopted by tabloids, sketched by rumour. They question the brushstrokes. They talk of unreliable narrators, of government witnesses who traded their own storms for umbrellas. They remind the jury that attention is not proof. The tone is steady. They are building a counterframe, not a bonfire. In the gallery, the press scribbles and murmurs. Some want an explosion. Some admire the lack of fireworks. The Mirror reporter writes about the room itself, about how justice prefers a simple stage. The Drum reporter notes the colour of the tie and waits for sound bites that may never come. The first days bring structure. The judge sets boundaries you can feel like guardrails. No rushing, no shouting, no pageantry. Lawyers who try to swell their voices find them gently trimmed. Witnesses are guided, not paraded. The jury listens, the wood listens, the lights buzz in a calm, stubborn key. Then the tapes begin to speak. Not in the van now, not in the quiet room above Mulberry. Here, in front of 12 citizens and one patient judge, the hum becomes words. A clerk cues them up. Speakers breathe and release the captured sound. The room leans forward, not from hunger, but from duty. There are familiar voices on those reels. Jokes about dinners, chatter about errands, instructions that dance near the line, then step over. No shouting, no movie script. Just human tones talking about serious things in casual ways. The weight is in the contrast. Everyday cadence, uneveryday implication. John sits still. His face is a study in self-control. He listens to his own name appear like a guest in other mouths. He listens to friends and colleagues talk in rooms that once felt sealed. He does not flinch for the cameras. He does not glare at the speakers. If he feels betrayal, It is folded behind his eyes, not displayed. Jurors glance from speakers to table, from table to transcripts. They hear laughter folded around something heavier. They hear loyalty, bargains, instructions wrapped in weather talk. They hear nicknames used as tools. None of it is shouted. All of it is steady, and that steadiness rattles more than thunder would. The defense works. Cross-examinations are threads carefully pulled. They ask if words were misunderstood, if context is missing, if an agent's memory is as spotless as his shirt. They suggest that editing is a kind of storytelling, and that stories can be arranged. They aim not to erase, but to soften. Trial work is sanding, not detonating. The judge will not let the room tip into circus. When a lawyer raises his voice, the bench responds with a look that presses the volume down. When a spectator forgets where they are, order returns with a single measured request. Somebody tried once to bring theatre here in an earlier trial. The building remembers and has no interest in sequels. Outside, cameras wait for stumbles. They get doors opening and closing. They get the same careful suits. They get the same phrases about confidence in the process. The drum reporters work hard to make echoes sound like thunder. The Mirror reporter writes that the courthouse behaves like a serious parent among noisy children. In Queens, life continues its ordinary miracles. The barbershop opens, the bakery sells first slices, buses run their loops. At the clubhouse, the men follow the case by transcript more than by television. They do not cheer small wins, they do not weep at setbacks. They fold each new fact into the day's plan for steadiness. The old-timer watches coverage with the remote in one hand and a cup in the other. He has seen rooms like this before. Some broke good men, some fixed bad habits, some did neither. He tells the younger faces that a trial is a mirror and a maze at once. What you bring into it will find you. What you pretend not to see will walk beside you anyway. As weeks gather, witnesses step up putt by Y. Some arrive wrapped in deals, carrying their own histories like luggage. They point, they recall, they adjust. The prosecution builds its careful house out of their words and the tapes. The defense walks through that house, knocking on beams. Jurors watch to see which beams ring hollow. The judge watches all of them. The nickname that once slid off charges begins to feel heavier, not in a loud way, in the way a word repeated too often starts to sound strange and lose its shine. Teflon suggested slipping. These tapes suggest sticking. The city senses it in the angle of headlines. Less grin, more gravity. Through it all, John arrives each day composed. Some see defiance, some see discipline. Some see a man stubbornly performing calm for the sake of those watching him. He speaks to his lawyers, nods to familiar faces, walks past cameras that never seem fully satisfied. He plays his role in this measured play. In the clubhouse at night, the talk is softer. No one pretends the trial is a puzzle with easy corners. They speak of loyalty, but in the tense of memory now, not expectation. They speak of futures in a wider range, of places farther from Queens than anyone at this table once pictured. The air is not panicked, it is aware. One evening, the Mirror reporter files a piece that reads like a weather report for souls. She writes of a courtroom that would not blink. She writes of tapes that did not shout and yet spoke clearly. She writes of a man who once seemed to walk through rain without getting wet, and now must sit while the room decides how much rain has already fallen. The drum reporter writes of legacy and downfall, of drama he tries to locate in each nod and step. He reaches for fire and finds mostly procedure. The words still sell, but feel slightly out of tune with the measured pace inside those walls. The courthouse remains uninterested in his key. Closing arguments gather, like clouds formed from weeks of breath. The prosecutors lay the story out with maps and dates, with tapes and testimonies, with patterns drawn like careful stitches. They do not roar. They let accumulation do the heavy lifting. The defense counters with doubt, with alternate readings, with sharp question about the trustworthiness of those who traded stories for softer landings. The judge speaks to the jury in instructions carved from long practice. Weigh without passion, consider without prejudice. Remember that nicknames are not evidence. Remember that reputation is not a substitute for proof. The words fall like small stones into a still pond. The ripples are thought. Jury deliberation is a room inside a room. 12 chairs, a pot of coffee, stacks of paper. They take the tapes, the transcripts, the testimonies, and test each piece against the others. Hours become a day becomes more. Outside, the press speculates, spins, repeats. Inside, hands point at pages, not at people. Queens waits the way neighborhoods wait for weather. No panic, just attention. The clubhouse opens as usual, coffee poured, lists made. If anyone glances more often at the television, they pretend they are only checking the score of a long game. The old-timer sits a little straighter, as if he could hold the beams up by posture alone. When the jury returns, the building inhales. Seats fill, reporters lean, cameras focus. John sits at the same angle he has held for weeks. The judge takes the bench with a face that gives nothing away. The foreperson stands, with a paper that suddenly weighs more than its size. The words that follow are measured and final. A pattern has been accepted. The tapes did more than hum. They held. The courtroom that would not blink has made its decision. The nickname that once claimed nothing could cling has met evidence that does. There is no cheer inside, no jeer. The judge thanks the jurors for their service with genuine weight. Attorneys nod to wet another across the aisle, professionals who understand that this is the work. The marshals perform their duties without spectacle, rather using God, the bowl. Outside, the press finds its thunder at last. Headlines grow tall. The drum pounds about the fall of a Teflon myth. The Mirror notes the quiet glance exchanged between officers, lawyers, and onlookers, the sense that something large has shifted without an explosion. Drama. People on the steps talk in the low awe, reserved to endings that had seemed impossible until they arrived. In Queens, the news reaches the clubhouse like a late train that everyone expected and still hoped might be delayed. The men sit in the familiar room that now feels slightly rearranged by an invisible hand. The old-timer removes his hat. Frank lowers the television volume until the captions might as well be distant bells. No Wake reenacts events. No Wade curses the building of stone. They know that when tapes hum long enough, rooms listen. They know that choices travel, gather, and eventually knock. They speak of loyalty in a new key, not as code for defiance, but as care for families who will need steadiness through whatever comes next. The suit on the hook hangs empty and dignified. A chair at the table waits without promise. A sense of era settles gently, not as tragedy for this telling, but as a closing of back corridor so that others can be walked. The neighborhood outside still needs barbers and bread and buses. The work of keeping streets calm is not finished by any verdict. If you are listening to sleep, rest here. Picture the courtroom after everyone has gone. Benches still, microphones mute, flags at ease. The same space that held voices now holds silence with equal respect. The lights dim. A clerk stacks folders with care. Justice, for all its heavy reputation, leaves the room as quietly as a janitor. The city does what it always does. It files the day, changes the headline, keeps moving. Some will say the building proved itself. Some will say nothing proves anything forever. Children will still cross streets to school. Couples will still argue about nothing over diner eggs. Old men will still tell stories about the days when certain names were said differently. The courtroom that would not blink has done its part. Our story turns now toward echo, toward cells and conversations, toward the way a legend rearranges when viewed through bars and memory. But tonight, let the image be simple. Stone that did not lean, wood that did not warp, a nickname that met a wall that did not care for clever words. Chapter 9. The Cell and the Echo. Night in a federal prison is its own kind of city. Long corridors, small windows, doors that do not argue when they close, lights that never quite sleep. Footsteps find a new rhythm here, slower and shorter, as if respecting the walls. Outside the fences, the country stretches wide. Inside, distance becomes a rumour. John Gotti arrives at this chapter, not as the man with cameras at the curb, nor as the nickname floating above coffee cups, but as a prisoner with a number that lives on paper. The ride to this place is quiet. No motorcade, no press line. Iron has no interest in adjectives. Concrete has no use for fame. The cell is a measured rectangle. Bed, sink, shelf. A small desk that believes in straight backs. The view is a slice of sky that keeps its secrets. It is not built to impress or punish with theatrics. It is built to contain. The door closes with a sound like a period. The echo settles in for a long stay. Legend does not like small rooms. Legend prefers sidewalks, courts, clubhouses, steakhouses, camera flashes, whispered introductions. But legend is stubborn. Some of it squeezes through the bars as memory. Stories travel here, carried by paper, by news segments, by visiting voices. They reach the concrete and bounce back thinner. He carries himself as he did on the street. Shoulders straight, chin level, clothes neat even in regulation cloth. Old habits do not pack lightly. Respect, reduced now to nods and yes sir, still follows certain lines. Guards see a man used to command. Other inmates see a headline adjusted to scale. Everyone sees the same walls. Back in Queens, the clubhouse with no sign has lost its captain. The table is the same shape, the lamp the same soft glow, but the centre of gravity has moved. Jean reads new lists with a quieter pen. Pete measures weather in terms of who still comes through the door. Angelo watches faces that seem unsure which way respect should lean. Frank stacks clean glasses and counts fewer needed. The old-timer sits longer now, as if his presence could keep the building from learning the word empty. He talks not about downfall, that loud tabloid favourite, but about seasons. He reminds the room that power has always been a rental. He reminds them that loyalty, if it means anything, must know how to behave when the door locks behind someone. In the cell, time rearranges. Days are counted in small units, meals, mail, walks in circles under sky that looks further away than it is. John reads law, history, papers, letters. He can follow the path that stacked itself against him. He can see, with the benefit of hindsight and a narrow window, how tapes and patience and a courtroom that would not blink conspired with his own choices. The press outside still plays with his name now and then. Teflon no more. Dapper even here. They test new phrases, some sharp, some tired, but distance has crept in. The city has new concerns, new scandals, new myths to feed. Headlines that once burned his story in large type now offer him a corner of page 3. Fame discovers what every neighborhood eventually knows. Time is the best eraser. At the round table that remains, the men adjust without a map. Some drift away, pulled by self-preservation or opportunity. Some stay and lower their voices. Some reinvent their days, redirecting skills into quieter trades. The law has made its statement. The echo of that statement pushes people into new alignments. None of it is neat. All of it is human. On certain days, letters come to the prison, thick with loyalty, thin with apology, full of stories about the old streets. He reads about Queen's mornings, the barber still opening on time, the bakery selling bread like small anchors, kids walking past the old clubhouse address without knowing its weight. He reads about his family, their visits, their burdens. The letters stack, become a second set of walls, the set built from memory. Guards observe him the way might observe a retired actor. They know the role he played out there. They know the verdict that brought him here. Inside this routine, he is a man with set hours and limited choices. Some treat him with cool distance, some with a thin line of respect for the composure. Noah here calls him Teflon. The surface and the stain have met and found their truce. The old-timer still in Queens tells anyone who needs to hear it that echo is not the same as anthem. An anthem commands, an echo remembers. He says that if a man was generous, let that be remembered. If a man chose a hard road, let that be acknowledged without painting it gold. Truth must be able to sleep, or the whole block gets tired. Reporters occasionally make the trip for a fresh angle. They look through glass, take notes, hunt for signs of regret or denial. He gives them very little. A phrase about health, a phrase about faith, maybe a light wisecrack that survives the filter. They go back to their newsrooms half satisfied. The legend did not break for them. The man did not either. In the city, younger faces step into spaces once held by older names. Some learn from the spectacle and choose a softer profile. Some did not, and chase spotlights that burn skin. The streets notice. Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Manhattan. Each borough runs its own quiet poll on who understands that attention is a debt. The results arrive in the form of who sleeps peacefully. The tapes, now history, rest in labelled boxes. The van is reassigned. Agents move on to other patrols of patients. The courtroom that would not blink takes on new cases, applies the same steady gaze to different names. For them it was a large chapter. For the institution, it was what of many. That is the point of institutions. They outlast the stories. At night, in the cell, sound travels in different ways. A distant television, a cough, the rattle of keys. Somewhere down the tier, a man tells the same story for the 10th time. In this slow chorus, John's thoughts are his own. He may replay choices. He may defend them to himself. He may question. That is his private court. Our calm story stands at the doorway and does not trespass. Family visits provide a bridge between worlds. A room supervised, chairs bolted, time clipped at the edges, hugs if allowed. Conversations about school, about health, about money, about holidays that feel different now. He keeps his posture, tries to pour steadiness across the table, tries to be unmoved so they might be less shaken. After they leave, the door closes, and the echo of their voices keeps him company. Back in Queens, certain people cross themselves when passing St. John's Cemetery, and think of all the names, his included in time, that turned from sirens and suits into carved stone. They speak his name with a mix of criticism and warmth, depending on what they remember. For some, he is a symbol of defiance. For others, a caution about weight and fall. For many, both at once. The old clubhouse eventually changes. Signs come and go, tenants as well. A new shop moves in that has no idea about the decisions once made above its floor. They sell ordinary things. People argue over prices, not power. A child drags a backpack past the door without sensing that old stories are stacked under the tiles. This forgetting is not disrespect. It is how places survive. The echo does not only live in stones and files. It lives in the shift of how the city talks about bosses and crews and suits and cameras. The spectacle of certain trials made some on the street understand that notoriety is a poor shield. The steady work of agents and judges made others realize that the quiet grind of law is a slow tide. Change comes from both. For all the noise this story once made, many nights now pass where his name is not spoken. A family shares dinner with the television off. A barber locks his shop and walks home humming. A kid bikes in circles in what used to be an address whispered with awe. The absence of his name in their stories is not erasure. It is evidence that life goes on. In the cell, seasons mark themselves through the glass. Snow that barely shows. Heat that arrives as a rumour of thicker air. Autumn that might be guessed from a single leaf glimpsed in a courtyard. He feels these changes like a man reading weather reports from a ship that never leaves port. The world moves, his square of it holds. He keeps to routines, wakes early, reads, keeps his space ordered. Order is all thing he can still own. Men around him notice. Some copy his habits, some resent them. A guard once said, in a tone meant for no microphone, that he carries himself like the job never ended. Possibly it did not, only the address changed. News of his health leaking away arrives to the outside in careful lines. The press raises its head for a moment, writes about decline, about transfers, about medical wards. Headlines briefly try to reopen the old suit, the old courtroom, the old tapes. The city glances, then returns to present tense. New concerns, new storms, new names. Time does its job. When he finally leaves this world, it is behind walls, with steel closer than sky. Papers report it with a tone part summary, part closing credits. Some talk of his crimes, some of his manners, some of the spectacle. The calm truth is that a chapter ended in a place where doors are heavy and footsteps echo. No street parade, no curtain call. St. John's receives him in the end, bringing him home in a way that closes a circle. Queen's sky above, grass, stone, names of others who chose or were pulled into versions of the same long story. People come, some in grief, some in curiosity, some in a mood they cannot name. Flowers placed, words spoken softly, or not at all. The echo that remains after that is thinner and more real, not the roar of legend, not the harsh shout of condemnation alone. A blend. Stories of charity, stories of harm translated in our telling as making people unalive, distant but real. Stories of style, of pride, of defiance, of the stubborn human wish to be larger than the room. Stories of consequences that arrived as patiently as the hum of those old tapes. In the clubhouse that is no longer the clubhouse, someone new sweeps the floor. In the courthouse that will try new names, clerks shuffle new files. In the neighborhoods that once measured themselves against his fame, kids chase their own futures without knowing how close they are running to old borders. The system that caged him continues, imperfect and grinding, sometimes wrong and sometimes right, always made of people. The old-timer, older now, sits on a bench near the cemetery on a clear afternoon. He reads names without moving his lips. He nods once to the stone that bears John's. He remembers certain laughs and certain storms. He does not excuse, he does not sanctify. He does the small brave thing of holding more than one truth at the same time. Then he checks his watch and goes to meet his granddaughter for ice cream. Life, as it prefers, wins the scene. If there is a lesson for the city, it is not written in neon, it is small. The suits, the clubhouses, the nicknames, the trials, the cells, the echoes, all of it belongs to one long conversation about power and cost. The calm version of this story does not cheer for any side loudly. It stands at the edge and says, "This happened," and people slept uneasy for a while, and then they learned to sleep again. For those falling asleep now, let the last images blur. A cell quiet at last, bed made, light out. A street in Queens without cameras, only porch bulbs and the smell of dinner. A courtroom swept, benches empty, flags resting. A cemetery under a simple sky, and beyond all of it, the steady breathing of a city that takes every story, sharp and soft, and folds it into its endless, patient hum. Chapter 10. The city keeps breathing. Morning slides into New York like it always has, unbothered by names that once shook the papers. Sun on brick, steam from grates, trucks backing up with that familiar beeping that sounds like a small argument. A baker unlocks, a barber sweeps, a bus driver finishes a coffee that is slightly too hot and drives anyway. The city is busy remembering itself. On a side street in Queens, the building that once held the club with no sign wears a new life. Bright front, simple goods, respectable hours. People push the door open with thoughts about errands, not arrangements. The floorboards still remember old footsteps, but memory is private now. The bell above the door rings in the open key of ordinary business. The old-timer walks past some mornings, slower than before, coat a little heavier. He notes the change without resentment. He thinks of nights when decisions stretched in the air like wire. He thinks of names that moved the needle and names that vanished under dust. He blesses the mundanity. Power has shifted to landlords, and landlords have always been harder to romanticize. He smiles at that. St. John's Cemetery is quiet in its practiced way. Rain, sun, snow repeat. Names on stone side by side, some spoken often, some almost forgotten, all equal to the grass. Somewhere among them lies the man who once made cameras swarm and juries lean close. Visitors come now and then, some with devotion, some with curiosity, some with a confusion of both. They stay a short while and go back to streets where bills need paying. For a time after his passing, talk flares up. Stories poured like coffee. The good he did for this wit. The harm translated softly for our telling as making people unalive. The cost that trailed behind glamour and loyalty and anger. The balance is argued on stoops, at counters, in corners of bars. Then that talk softens too, blended into the larger hum of a city that cannot afford to orbit ghost forever. The tapes sleep in their boxes, the courthouse moves on, agents work new files, lawyers argue new narratives. The cell that held him now holds someone else, measuring days in the mechanical rhythm of lock and unlock. Institutions continue their long effort to be better than the people who misuse them, and better than the people who doubt them. Success is uneven. Still, the work is there. Meanwhile, kids who were not born when his suits were news ride past old addresses on scooters and bikes. To them, these are just corners. A deli with a good sandwich. A barber shop that knows how to line a part. A church that rings on Sundays. Their parents might remember flashes, front pages, maybe a televised verdict. Many choose not to bring it up at bedtime. Sleep, not spectacle, is the gift worth passing down. There is a story told sometimes in a low voice, not just about him, but about that whole age of tall hair, taller collars, long dinners, quiet cars, open coats on courthouse steps. The calm version leans on three truths. First, that charisma can wrap sharp edges in velvet. Second, that loyalty can warm and can burn. Third, that the law, when patient, can follow a whisper all the way to a door. On a fall evening, the old-timer sits in a cafe with big windows and no ghosts. His granddaughter stirs her cocoa and asks why people talk about that last name with such mixed feelings. He thinks carefully, because children deserve precision without nightmares. He says some men are generous to their neighbours and dangerous to strangers, and sometimes to their own. He says some men stand tall for their people and stand against the law, and the bill comes due. He says it is important to remember all of it at once so you do not trip on half the truth. She nods the way kids nod when they sense weight and decide to carry a little of it. Then she asks for another cookie. The city, listening as it always does, seems to approve. Life goes on is not a slogan here. It is a muscle memory. Mulberry Street still sells espresso and saints in small frames. A few aging faces remember the upstairs apartment that was not just an apartment. They recall murmurs about wires, about tapes that hummed, about conversations that turned into exhibits. Those memories live beside others that matter more day to day. Births, weddings, rents, blackouts, the year the feast lights seemed extra bright. The hum of the tapes has become part of the layered music, no longer the solo. In a union hall, older men talk about the dapper Don days with a little shine and a little warning. In quiet precinct offices, veterans remind rookies that famous defendants are still defendants, and that nicknames make bad reports. In law school classrooms, the case appears on a syllabus with other cases about enterprise, evidence, and patience. Future lawyers underline lines, then they go out for late slices, their own dramas still unwritten. The city has absorbed the story. It lives now in infrastructure, in how cases are built, in how cameras are treated on courthouse steps, in how crews learn or fail to learn that spotlights are searchlights in disguise, in how neighbourhoods judge a certain kind of flash, weighing charm against the risk it carries for everyone on the block. On a spring afternoon, the barber in Queens, who has seen 3 mayors and 10 trends, puts down his broom and looks at the empty doorway of the old club. He remembers men stepped from big cars, hair sprayed, shoes polished, laughter controlled. He remembers televisions glowing with trials. He remembers the day the verdict came down and how the street did not crack open or burst into flame. Trash was still collected. Kids still argued about baseball. He nods to himself. Big stories, small lives, side by side. At St. John's, flowers fade and are replaced. A woman stops at his stone, presses her fingers to the carved name, whispers something between a blessing and a grievance. 2 men stand off to the side, caps low, hands in pockets. They say little, respect, regret, habit, affection, all tangled. Then they walk back toward traffic, where crosswalk signals blink their ordinary commands. The memory of his style lingers in small touches. A certain way a collar sits, a certain swagger in an older man's stride on Rockaway Boulevard. Certain barbers still know how to cut hair for a client who wants to feel untouchable. They do the cut, take the cash, and hope the untouchable part is only in the mirror. Prosecutors who worked the case retire with folders of experience filed in their own minds. Some wonder if they balanced the scales enough. Some know they did their job and sleep simply. Agents who logged those long hours with headphones find new hums to follow. When asked by their children, they describe the work as listening for patterns, not as starring in a story. They leave the capes to comic books. In the long view, the legend shrinks to human size. Not a monster in the dark, not a saint in silk. A man with charm and choices. Choices that built loyalty. Choices that brought harm, translated in our story as unmaking lives. Choices that pulled down law like slow rain until something had to give. A man who basked in his myth until a courtroom declined to share the fantasy. A man who then lived out his last years inside walls that did not care how sharp his tie once was. New names take the stage here and there. Some try to replay the old script. The city, older and a little wiser, does not clap as hard. Cameras still show up, but there is a faint fatigue in their whir. Viewers at home have seen this plot. Some turn the channel to a cooking show. Some sigh and say, "Not this again." This mild boredom is its own kind of progress. Through all of it, New York continues its endless, ordinary miracles. Train doors open. Sushi is rolled in basements that once held ledgers. School kids rehearse lines for plays where villains are fictional and easily corrected. Nurses get off overnight shifts and walk into daylight like champions. Parents work 2 jobs and fall asleep on couches, hoping the city will be kind to their children. The story of John Gotti's consolidation of power, his season as a neighborhood prince and national headline, his dance with nicknames, his eventual conviction, his years in a cell, folds into this wider fabric. It becomes one thread among thousands. Important, yes. Instructive, yes. But not the spine of the book. The spine of the book is every regular person who kept living while those chapters played out. Our calm telling has walked beside him without cheering, without erasing, without blood on the page. We watched him step from club to courthouse, from cameras to concrete, from legend to echo. We watched law and loyalty test each other. We watched the city learn, forget, remember, and keep functioning. We saw that even at its loudest, this tale was housed inside a larger, quiet truth. New York wants to keep breathing. Tonight, trucks still growl over the bridges. Steam still rises from manholes like gentle ghosts. Somewhere in Queens, a kid who has never heard of the Dapper Don leans over homework and imagines a future far from these streets, or deep within them, but clean. Somewhere in Brooklyn, an old man tells a story about a man in a perfect suit, and ends it with a shrug that suggests fate is stubborn. Somewhere in Staten Island, a ferry cuts through dark water, carrying tired people home. If you are listening in bed, let this be the landing. The suits are on their hangers, the club doors are closed or turned to safer trades, the courthouse sits under a calm sky, the prison lights glow for other stories. The tapes are boxed, the stones at St. John's rest. The people who remain keep choosing, every morning, between loud and steady. The city keeps breathing. That is the constant. Through bosses and trials, headlines and hums, legends and their endings, New York keeps its slow heartbeat, carried in subway breaks, in bakery ovens, in classroom bells, in quiet living rooms where someone finally reaches for the lamp. The story dims with it. Your eyes can close now. The weight of this tale belongs to the past. The night belongs to your rest.